I gotta look back and say that my life was okay. I got my share of everything but money, and the guys who went out for that, some of them got it today, but put too much time in getting it. Whatever. That's history. Right now, here we are. And I ain't complaining, but things would be a lot easier if we had a little extra cash. And besides, what the hell could we lose? Either we get the money or we get caught. We're podcasters either way.
Wow.
I didn't have it.
Nice.
No.
Grizzled.
Grizzle. I was like
Ben, you
watching
can sit
it
down.
last night, and I was like, do I have a George Burns in me? And I could do grizzled, but there's some specific quality in the voice I feel like I'm missing there.
They don't make guys like
They don't make guys like that
I think
anymore.
can I chime in already?
Please,
Yes, you
please.
can.
I
note
think
me.
he's deceptively hard to do.
He is.
Because in my research, I watched a clip of him on a special that Rich Little was on, the eminent,
Okay. Yes.
biggest impressionist
Man of a Million
the
Voices.
70s.
Yes. Right.
And there's a bit where Rich does George to George's face.
Yes.
And frankly, and no disrespect to Rich Little,
No, I
just
think I
don't
want
think,
you to disrespect
I
him.
don't
Disrespect
think he
him.
quite nailed it. I think it was as good as what you just did.
Interesting.
I have long found, I've complained about it on this very
Sure.
podcast, that Rich Little is weirdly overrated.
Rich Little Mid
and
is a take
you'll
we have.
watch these clips of
Yeah.
him doing exactly this, of him going to Carson and being, doing Carson in front of Carson. And you expect, like, man, Carson's voice is about to come out of this man. And
Yeah.
instead, you're like, oh, this is like a fine impression.
Maybe it's generational. When I
Sure.
grew up, Rich Little was the impressionist
Right,
in the
the number
70s.
one.
Yes.
So he just equals impressions to me.
Exactly.
Right.
But, like, you watch it now and he just seems fine.
I remember, I think towards the end of his life,
If we're going to talk about Rich Little on any episode,
we're not.
this is I'm saying this is a good
no,
one.
sure.
Like,
towards the end of his life,
Rich Little's life.
nope, introducing a new person. Frank Gorshin
Yes.
did a George Burns one-man show off Broadway called Say Goodnight, Gracie.
Oh, yeah, sure.
And I remember seeing
Wow.
the poster and being
this
like,
rings a bell. yeah.
Gorshin's a good visual fit.
Because
I wonder, and he's
They
obviously
slapped
was
the
a great
glasses on
impressionist.
him. Yeah.
Right.
Gorshin's really good, and bells are ringing. He does a really funny Marlon Brando impression.
I'm just wondering if Gorshin nailed it.
Because Burns, it's...
I think he did.
It's
I
hard
think
to
I
do,
think
yeah.
Gorshin may have a little more dimension. I think Gorshin may be. Here's the thing.
Better. Certainly a better actor.
I'll argue this
Right, sure.
100%. And here's the thing. In the movie of The Late Shift
Uh-huh.
that Betty Thomas directed about
Yes.
the Letterman
With,
Leno Wars.
Right,
Yes.
with
One of the great films.
well,
Well, it's John Michael Higgins
is
and
Letterman.
Dan Roebuck.
Dan Roebuck is
Daniel
Leno.
Roebuck
Right.
plays Leno,
Yeah.
the teen murderer from River's Edge,
Yes.
which
Yes,
seemed like
and-
very appropriate
And
casting. So.
he was in
Arst.
Lost Arts, right?
He
blew
gets
up.
dynamited.
But
Yeah.
they're playing Johnny Carson,
Yeah.
Letterman's confidant
Yes.
and mentor,
Yes.
is Rich Little.
Yes.
Because
Right.
presumably Rich Little can do a Johnny Carson
like
impression.
I said, he could do a famous Carson, and I thought
and
it
his
was
Carson,
about as good
he
as
does.
mine.
I think he does a good Carson impression, but he's not an actor.
No.
Right.
And you need a real actor in that role. Don't worry about. I think that's the one major misfire of The Late Shift. The casting of Rich Little
A
as Johnny
deeply
Carson.
watchable movie. My buddies
Pretty fun
at
movie.
our buddies at Podcast The Ride are obsessed with The Late Shift and watch it like biannually.
Well, just like the utter nicheness of like,
Yes.
let's do a TV movie about this recent change. It was like 94.
Yeah,
It was like not long. Oh, no, 96. Okay. But still, like,
But
pretty
that
soon.
stuff was news. It was
Yes.
a huge pop cultural event.
But look, I mean, I said this last time you were on, gonna say it again. You're one of my favorite people to talk about acting with. And I remember you and I having a conversation about how good John Michael Higgins was in The Late
He's
Shift.
really
that was
good.
the time you first noticed him.
Ah, that makes sense.
And what
That
feels
makes
like
sense.
it should be an impossible role to pull
And
off.
Letterman would really make fun of him.
Letterman
Yes.
Letterman liked to roast
took a
that
lot of swipes at him.
performance.
Yeah.
But I think his is the very good performance.
Yes.
Roebuck is totally fine as Leno, but Leno is so cartoonish as a person.
Yes.
He's a little easier to
And
do in a
Kathy
way.
Bates is like going to the fucking mat. in that movie. Kathy
She's
Bates
doing
is
a great part for
Primary
her.
Colors. Right, yeah.
Yes.
She's
Great
warming
part
that
for
up.
her.
Yes.
David, what do you mean about Leno?
There's just, there's something about that guy.
Really?
Hey, Ben, you ever notice this?
He's something.
Hey, Ben.
He's something. That's the only Leno I have is just saying here's something. Here's something. What's Leno doing? Is he around? Oh, he got like set on fire.
He was set on fire.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Which I shouldn't make fun.
And then I've
you
talked
heard
about
about
this in the
this?
podcast, but
I remember he was in an accident. Though I don't remember the details.
I've talked about this on the podcast, but he did like his exclusive first interview after they did like the skin grafts and he had recovered. And I forget what news show it was part of, or it was Today Show or whatever, but he wouldn't stop making jokes about it. And whoever it was interviewing him, like Robin Roberts, or I think it was Savannah Guthrie, was like, Jay, but seriously, are you okay? Hey, who cares about me? No one wants to hear me talk seriously. And they were like, you almost died.
You can talk about
You can
this
talk
if you're
seriously.
so
No
choose.
one wants to hear a millionaire complain.
The weird thing about Rich Little, and
Yeah.
I already have said this, it's like you can go see him perform now and
yes.
he'll do like a Jack Benny impression.
Yes.
And it's like what the cultural context required at this
well,
point.
first of
for
all,
a Rich Little
he's passed,
performance.
hasn't he?
No, he's still alive.
Oh, he is? Oh,
He
my
is
goodness.
85 years old. Here he is as Jack Benny at like the Comedy Store.
Insane.
Like recently-ish.
That's amazing. Because there's a great sketch on, there's an I Think You Should Leave sketch
Yes.
where very young people,
Mhm.
like Zillennials, are at a party and they
The-
all
the Heidecker.
recognize that
Oh,
a man has shown up
yes.
as a Johnny Carson impersonator.
He's allowed
Or for
to
me,
hate.
the funniest joke of the sketch was that a bunch of 23-year-olds know who Johnny Carson is.
Yes.
That he's such a part of the culture
Wild
that even
stuff.
they...
I thought you were going to say the opposite. The Heidecker charade sketch where he keeps putting obscure jazz musicians in and
That
is
one's also
astounded that they don't know.
Griffin,
Who's
That
Dan
sketch-
Ronk or whatever?
for those who don't know, that's about a Gen Xer
Dave
Yes.
at a party who's dating a millennial.
Yes.
And they're playing celebrity, and the Gen Xer is doing not only Gen X references, but old-timey references,
Right.
some of which are made up for this sketch.
Gen X nostalgia.
Right, I feel like
That
they start
sketch-
out real and get more absurd.
That's
yes.
I felt like I was having my skin taken off. That hit so hard.
Yes.
It was incredibly funny,
Yes.
but also
in the writer's room, they were actually like, let's sock it to Urbaniak.
well,
Let's
that's
just
what
do
it felt like.
Yeah. Well, this is a big old timey episode.
It is.
Oh
We're
my
going to
God,
be
it's
talking
so
a lot of
old-timey.
old timey showbiz here on this episode.
And thank you for asking me to be on this.
Well, I'm going to say why we had you on in a second, but this is Blank Check with Griffin and David. I'm Griffin.
I'm David, and I'm just realizing we don't know what this miniseries is called.
I know what it's called.
I figured you did.
I texted it to James. I've had it locked
You
in
didn't text it to me.
because he texted asking me what it was going to
Oh,
be.
sure.
I
Yeah,
had
yeah.
some. They were in pitches. I knew you'd already thought of all the things I
Yeah.
texted you. I was
Yeah.
just curious.
Yeah. So this is a podcast about filmographies, directors who have massive success early on in their careers,
Yes, undoubtedly.
given a series of blank checks to make whatever crazy passion projects they want. Sometimes those checks clear. Sometimes they bounce, baby.
Sometimes they bounce, baby. See, I can't do it either.
Sometimes they bounce. Is that a little bit close?
Sometimes
There's the cigar in the voice. There's the.
We'll get to this
We'll get
because
to it.
there's a very precise management of energy that he
That's
does.
true. There's a very no.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
it's masterful, is what.
it's
it is.
it, it this is a masterful performance.
Burns is incredible.
Unbelievable in this. In my opinion, he should
Everyone's
have won
good.
all 4 acting categories at the Oscars this year.
Wait, well, you're gonna have to. Just as an homage to his great skill.
Yeah.
They're like, there's no Best Supporting Actress this year. Only George Burns again. Come on stage, please,
Thank
sir.
you very much.
Yeah, right.
This is a miniseries on the films of Martin Brest. We're kicking it off here with this one, but someone who had what we were discussing off mic, pre-record, the kind of classical blank check arc we originally built this show around.
100%.
Like
Always
the
has.
perfect kind of,
The show could have been conceived
yes,
around his
early
filmography.
successes,
One
series
of-
of blank checks, bounce.
I feel like
Yeah.
just one of the earliest people we thought of for this
Correct.
show.
Yeah.
Because of Gigli, because of like this sort of Meet Joe Black Gigli ending,
Yes.
we probably were often building around famous bombs.
Yeah. And
And then going outward, right?
And at the time we started the show, he hadn't made a movie in over 10 years. And 9 years later, he still has not made another film. We're talking about Martin Brest, the great Martin Brest. For the next couple months,
Yeah, just what, 7 weeks?
we're going to be some breast men.
We are.
We're the breast men. And this series is called Podverly Hills Cast.
Nice. Which is one of a reference.
Thank
to-
you. Thank you.
One of his big-breasted hits, if I may. BREST.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Am I allowed to say that for this?
You can say
miniseries?
big-breasted.
I'm allowed to say big-breasted hit.
Do you agree, Ben?
It's, yeah, it's
As long as you
it's
spell
acceptable.
it without an A.
Of course.
Yes.
So you didn't want to do pod of a scent cast.
No, I wanted to
scent
do
of a podcast.
Podverly. I said to James, I said, Podverly is such a good word. It's going to be a pleasure to say on mic. It's going to hit the ear beautifully.
It has good
for
mouth
weeks
feel.
on end. It has great
I don't know
mouth.
if it's hitting the ear beautifully. It's
Podverly-
rattling in.
Podverly Hills Cast.
It's not like a 3-pointer where it's just nothing but net. There's a couple bounces.
Yeah, but that's adding tension. That makes it all the more satisfying when it goes through.
Did you consider Meat Podcast?
I did, and here's what I landed on instead: Podverly Hills Cast.
Podverly Hills Cast.
Today we're talking about his first commercially released film. He had a very kind of successful, unusually successful short film that got a lot of traction, a lot of play, including being aired on SNL. And then he went to AFI, made a thesis feature-length film that got seen to some extent, but mostly was sort of a calling card movie for him. This is his first studio movie, the first film to get wide release. Those two things I just mentioned, Hot Dogs for Gauguin and Hot Tomorrows, we will be covering on Patreon.
Yes, we will. Yeah.
But this is his
This is his first real thing.
full-breasted movie.
Yeah.
If I can say that. Ample-breasted film.
Okay.
We got to nip this punning in the bud pretty
I
soon.
think so. We're gonna
You just
drive
allowed
this.
me.
I opened the door on it.
And I can't say no to movie stars.
Because
Going
I had to be the
in
first
style.
one to say
You, of course.
big-breasted.
This is, you
Right.
get to set the precedent.
because I needed to.
Return to the show.
He's back.
My dear friend.
Yes.
One of our finest actors.
Well,
I mean, yes.
Last time,
I'll allow it.
Had you
You
been
were
on
on this
Oppenheimer?
podcast. No.
When you were
you
no.
filmed it, but it hadn't come out.
Yeah, obviously you'd filmed it. But no, I think the last
Yeah,
time
I was a guest just almost a year ago. It was
Yeah.
May of last year.
Right,
And
so-
we're recording this in April. of
I
the
know, but
following
that's
year.
right. You had obviously Oppenheimer came
Yeah,
out
I
in
must
July.
have just done Oppenheimer.
You had recently been in West Side Story.
Yes.
And so we
No,
discussed that. I mean,
Fablemans.
Fablemans. I always
Fablemans.
confuse the two.
Sorry.
Because
The
you're
other-
in a gym.
Yeah, and I'm
And
a
high
high
school
school
gym.
principal.
Yes.
Both films feature high school gyms.
Yeah,
Yes.
And both of those movies have friends of the show in them.
That's right. And I once was like, there's 3 friends of the show in the West Side Story scene. But no, you're in the Fableman scene, of course.
Yeah. No, I mean, you, a highly esteemed actor, incredible career.
I'm only doing tentpole movies.
Of
now.
course.
That's my new thing. No more of this indie bullshit.
well, also trying to only be in films that have to be
Nolan,
covered on Blank Check
Spielberg.
because they're previous directors we've covered.
Yes.
You already had an incredible career under your belt last year when you were on the show, but since then, America, nay the world, saw you stare at the sky in IMAX.
True.
A transformative effect.
Indeed.
Saw Einstein tut about you.
Yeah.
Watch me play with my little hat in IMAX, where my hat was big as a Volkswagen.
Humongous. And the resolution, the detail.
Is Tom
Right, you
Conti,
could see every pore in my
Yeah.
relatively good skin.
Tom Conti nice?
Very nice. We were both staying in the same hotel in Princeton when we shot that scene at Princeton. It's set at the Princeton.
right. You didn't? Did you actually shoot it at the what's it called? Research.
Well,
you
I don't know if that place still exists.
It does. It does. It does.
No, we actually shot it at the university, which is
Right.
not where that scene is set,
Okay.
but the adjacent research place. He was. I would see him. My first morning there, I saw him eating breakfast in the hotel.
Nolan
And
or
no, Mr. Tom Conti,
Okay.
who plays
Nolan
Einstein.
doesn't eat breakfast.
No, Nolan and Mr. Murphy were not staying in the hotel
no
that I was
smartphones,
staying
no
at
breakfast.
with
Sure.
Tom Conti,
You were-
which was perfectly
Hey, but look,
nice.
the Conti Hotel is still nice.
It was like a Westin. It was just
Sure.
your standard,
Yeah.
But I saw him and I thought, oh, there's Einstein. But I was a little shy. I actually didn't want to bother him because I was like, I'll see him on the set tomorrow and I'll talk to him then.
And was it just one day?
It was just one day.
People talk about how surprisingly fast Nolan works.
Well, my only context is that scene, which is a relatively simple scene with
Yeah.
3 people in it.
You're in the woods.
That goes by quickly.
Yeah.
Without a lot of setups. But it did go by pretty quickly.
Yeah. That's
So-
what I've heard from
How
everybody.
loud is the dang IMAX camera?
That's a
though?
good question.
That was insane. It was like making a silent movie in 1918. It was like...
Yeah, that's what. What's it? Benny Safdie says it sounds like a lawnmower.
It was,
I haven't dismissed
I was
that. Yeah.
completely befuddled. I mean, and I didn't do any ADR, so somehow...
They captured
Look,
it.
it is weirdly underdiscussed when
Right.
people talk about.
Well, Killian had a big microphone in his hat. That's why he
Sure.
has to wear it all the time.
Yes.
But people talk about, like, why is the sound mixing weird in Nolan movies? Why can you sometimes not hear dialogue and whatever?
Right.
And what I've always heard is that, like, he doesn't like ADR. He thinks ADR sticks out, and he loves to shoot with these loud ass cameras. And
Right.
so instead, he's muffling the camera sound, which then maybe has some ripple effect on the dialogue.
Tom Conti, the only actor my mother ever wrote a fan letter to.
Really?
Which I believe, did I not bring that up on the episode?
maybe.
What year did she write this note?
He was in...
It was last year after she saw
was
Oppenheimer.
this for the Norman Conquests on PBS?
No, although what a wonderful pull, and I love the
Incredible
Norman
pull.
Conquests.
Was it the Broadway production of Whose Life Is It Anyway?
There you go. That's right. She
Please.
saw him in that.
I know my Conti.
She saw him in that on Broadway, so she would have been...
Oh, lovely.
I was like 79, so she would have been like, 26,
And she
27.
wrote to him Care of the Theater?
That's actually a good question. How did she get in, but yeah, either Care of the Theater or maybe his management or
That's
something.
lovely.
I
Now,
don't know.
did he
And he replied.
write, that's lovely.
Yes.
Well,
That's
he was a very nice guy.
But
Yeah.
she said it was the only time she had been so affected by something, some performance that she felt moved
Well-
to write a letter.
And I remember I grew up in New Jersey. So when I didn't see that show, but when it was on Broadway, I was in high school and they had a local TV commercial for it. And it was Tom Conti speaking as himself, saying, "My name is Tom Conti.
Hello, dear boy.
Yeah, hello, dear audience.
I'll be on Friends in 20 years or so.
I'm in this play called Whose Life Is It Anyway? And it's about a man who's
Paralyzed.
et cetera,
Yes.
et cetera. And then he said something to the effect of, and it has such a remarkable effect on audiences. So the thing you're just describing is what he was selling, and he was right.
He
David
was right.
Sims's mother will lose her lid.
I got a letter from a Ms., well, whatever her name was at the time.
It's still her
Topolsky
name,
Sims.
Topolsky.
Yes,
Topolsky.
by
No,
a
no
young
sense.
lady named Topolsky.
Yes, right. I mean,
And I can
just
see
think
her
about it.
teardrops on this very piece of paper.
He also said, someday, Colin Mockery and Ryan Stiles will make a whole career riffing on the title of this play.
For humorous effect.
Yes.
And there is humor
Wayne
in
Brady
the play.
too, but he'll have other things going
Yes, he'll
on.
sort of branch out.
And I
Mockery
predict-
will really kind of pitch his tent here.
I will one day play Albert Einstein. In an
Me,
in a
Einstein.
YMAS film. He didn't quite have IMAX right.
Right.
But he
Give
was-
him credit for getting
Good
even
go.
some of the letters.
Some
straight.
letters.
But it won't be
Yes.
about him. I'll
Yes.
just be off to the side.
Some
there.
New Jersey upstart.
With a very
puts around
handsome
with
young
his
character.
hat,
Well, not
yes.
that young, but anyway.
Look up at the sky.
James, as I said, you're one of my favorite people to
Thank
talk
you.
about acting with. A thing that often I feel like people struggle to have the language for. I certainly feel like I struggle with it. I find you often find that critics struggle to really understand sort of on a process level. And I think many great actors also, the process is sort of so deeply ingrained in them and kind of unknown that it's hard for them to express themselves. And when
Yeah.
it comes out, it often comes out in very pretentious ways. Whereas I feel like you've had this always had this very strong language for sort of brass tacks analysis of sort of acting styles and people's effects on screen and on
Yeah,
stage.
it's just something that I've always been interested in. I think I was compelled by this when I was very young, before I even knew I wanted to be an actor. I remember a few years ago, a character actor named Jack Riley died. Jack Riley
Oh,
played
yes.
Mr. Carlin on the Bob Newhart show, the sort of
Yes.
misanthropic.
Oh yeah, sure.
He was on many episodes of Night Court
A lot of TV in
believe.
the 70s
or
and
Mary
80s.
Tyler Moore show.
Yeah, Mary
Um,
Tyler Moore show. He was on a couple times, I think, actually playing different parts.
You know who else he was?
I was going to say.
He was Stu Pickles in Rugrats. the,
Okay, that's
cartoon.
after my time.
I know that's
so
after
I
your
don't
time.
know him from
David
that.
Pivotal
has-
character for
David
me.
has contended that is the hottest man in the history of animation. Is the tired dad on
I think
Rugrats?
he's
voiced by
good
Jack
looking.
Riley.
I'm not saying he's the hottest ever. Anyway,
But I will tell you that
Jack Riley.
when I was a kid, I would watch the Bob Newhart show during its original run,
Mhm.
and Mr. Carlin was this sort of, for lack of a better word, deadpan sort of character,
Yeah.
who was kind of a misanthrope and a sad sack.
Mhm.
Mm.
And Jack Riley just had this sort of very contained quality to his acting. It was very funny. You know, he just talked about how depressed he is, and he his voice always sort of stayed at this level. And I thought it was really funny. And then when he died a couple of years ago, I thought, oh, Jack Riley, I always loved him. And I realized when I was 10 years old, he was my favorite character on Newhart. And I'm
Yeah.
sure because it was some incipient interest in the technique of acting that
Yeah.
I was actually drawn towards his performing technique.
Interesting.
And the fact is that sort of internal
Yeah.
kind of, that's actually an area that I get cast in sometimes.
yeah,
in play.
absolutely.
And in fact, I think George Burns is actually very good at that in a certain way, this sort of
I
contained
agree.
energy.
Yeah.
And
Sure,
so I
especially.
think, so my point is, I think from an early age, I was drawn to the technical aspects of acting before I even knew the vocabulary or knew what that was. I didn't just think Mr. Carlin was funny. I was compelled by what
Right,
Jack
what is he
Riley was doing, even though I didn't understand that at the time.
I just want to double check my facts here because I watched both Mary Tyler Moore and Night Court in the pandemic in sort of mushy brain era in their entirety. He was on 2 episodes of Mary Tyler Moore and he was on 7 episodes of Night Court. And in all cases, he played an entirely different character on each episode.
This is a great thing that Law and Order did this in
Yes.
New York too. They would cast the same actor 6 times over
Law
the
and
course
Order's
of
the
a
only
few
one
years.
that still does it.
I wish they'd keep doing it because
It was
I
fun
need
to
the work.
like watch. Well, yes, but it was also
fair-
fun to watch
fair
Night
note.
Court and be like, oh, 2 seasons later, here's Jack Riley as an entirely different guy, and
Yeah.
he wasn't transforming himself. He had a very
Yeah,
specific
but
style.
who's checking?
He's
Exactly.
doing his Jack Riley thing.
And it was just like this guy always scores. Bring him back. If it's been
exactly.
if it's been 35 episodes, put a different suit on him and introduce him as a new guy.
Yeah, and if some people remember, it doesn't matter. We all know this is make believe.
Who gives a shit? Griffin Newman going to be watching this in the pandemic on Amazon Freevee 4 years from now?
No, I want them to
Freebie.
bring that. I want TV producers to bring back the multiple guest shot
Yeah,
where you
absolutely.
play different characters because you and I would clean up.
Don't even shell out, Griffin. Just buy that sucker. You're suffering through the ads.
Well, now I bought the whole series on iTunes. The point here is, I went to see you were doing a play in Los Angeles.
Yes,
by
just
John
last
Ross
month, and you
Bowie,
happened to be in LA and you
Brushstroke.
saw it.
Brendan Hines,
Friend of the show,
dear friend of the show, the great
Multiple
Malcolm
guests,
Barrett,
great Malcolm Barrett.
who I'd never met before but been a fan of for a long time. You were excellent in the show, and we
Thank you.
went out for drinks and chips afterwards at a Mexican place nearby. And you said, so who do you have coming up on Blank Check? And I said, Martin Brest. And you went, going in style. You immediately,
Did I?
Not
yeah.
the first thing many
No.
would say, I would say, right?
Yes.
Most people would probably go for Beverly Hills Cop,
Yeah.
Sensible Woman.
And then you ran down
Midnight
the rest
Run.
of the
Then I was
credits.
like, I think then I said to you, "Who are you getting for Midnight Run?" Because that's obviously the brass.
right.
it's
whatever.
the apex.
Right.
It's the, I
You
mean,
said
let's
that.
be honest.
But
it's
the
What's his-
first
it's his
words
greatest
out of
film.
your mouth
Yes.
were, going in style. And just hearing you say the title in your voice, it pinned in my head. And I texted
Yeah.
Sims and I said, we should get fucking Urbaniak for going in style. That's like,
I didn't throw
that
up a wall.
feels
I
like-
mean,
like
of
hand in
course,
glove.
perfect. You know.
Well, I'm glad you did. Thank you.
Malcolm Barrett's so funny in Better Off Ted, which I feel like not enough people talk about Better
show
Off
you
Ted
love.
anymore. Very good show.
yeah. But this is, for many reasons, I thought,
had to get
Malcolm's
that
a
in there.
brilliant actor.
as a lover of old-timey things, and that is a thing that you and I bonded over when we first met.
This stars 3 old timey things.
It stars 3 old-timey things and also sort of like 3 legends of show business who I would argue had very different acting styles.
100%. And
It's
yet,
one of the things
it
that is
works.
fascinating. They harmonize beautifully, but you're
The
watching
match of them on paper does not make sense, except that
Should
they're
work.
the same age.
and
Ish.
how much of this movie
Yes.
plays out in 3 shots, like masterful, extended, unbroken 3 shots.
I mean, especially Strasberg.
Well, we'll get into
We'll
this.
get into it.
We'll
Yeah.
get into
But this is because Brest is very much an actress director, and
Yes.
Martin Brest loves, and you'll get into this over the course of
Mm-hmm.
the series. He loves actors, and he loves what he gets from actors. He also loves movie stars,
Yes.
but he loves all actors, even the small down to the smallest supporting roles. So he likes and he likes behavioral energy.
yes.
So in all his films, there will be kind of long takes that aren't broken up.
that are low on action, that are just
Yeah.
that are
right,
just
right,
people
right.
behaving. And there's some fantastic behavioral scenes in this movie.
This is a movie that is like truly might be 15% footage of very old men sitting in silence
Yes.
next to each
making
other.
coffee or whatever.
Right.
Yeah, just like being in a kitchen.
Right, just adjacent quiet stillness.
in a park,
Or
right.
mild sort of like puttering around. And it is utterly captivating.
This movie just sort of like has incredible confidence in that, in never leaning on what I assumed this movie was going to lean on.
Absolutely.
Hilarious old guy hijinks.
Yes, because it's a high concept pitch.
On
Right.
this
paper.
film.
These-
3 old
these
men
3 old-
decide to pull off a bank job.
Right.
And the kind of movie that could very easily be remade in a very obvious
By a sitcom
That's,
star.
lowbrow way by a
that's my.
sitcom
I
star.
haven't seen the remake,
Yeah.
but from what I've gleaned, that's a little more where that the
exactly
remake
what
leans.
you would imagine. And You could see, like, okay, the remake is the worst version of what was a more delicately handled version of a high concept comedy, rather than this movie, which is really like a pretty sobering meditation on the rejection of old people in society.
Like Martin
right?
Brest is also a great comedy director, but the movie doesn't lead with the comedy. The comedy resonates out of the situations.
It is
and the thing
deeply
is,
funny, but
of the three
yes.
actors, two of them are basically comic actors.
Yeah.
Are-
Vaudevillian.
George Burns is a comedian. Art Carney was known as a comic actor.
Yeah.
And who also did like impressions and sketch comedy.
One guy who's back.
honeymoon
And then
is
you've
like-
got like Mr. Dramatic Acting, Lee Strasberg,
The man
father
who like
of
synthesizes the method, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You have that. You have a guy whose training is basically like adjacent to clowning, and one guy whose background is primarily stand-up.
And then you've got a guy. How old is Martin at the time? 28 or something.
That's the
27.
craziest part. He's in his mid-20s.
And he wrote the
He
script.
wrote the script, and he
And-
seems to totally understand what it is to be a septuagenarian.
And
Yes.
these three older gentlemen.
Yeah.
Although Art Carney is actually my age when he made the film.
Art Carney
He's 60.
is 60.
He's got,
Which,
right,
by the
he's
way,
got
James, you look
Wilford,
incredible.
Thank you.
he's got Wilford Brimley energy.
I want
energy at all
to get
times,
grayer
yeah.
and bolder and fatter because I think I'll get more work now that I'm 60. But all three of those gentlemen understand the assignment.
Yes.
And it's a 1979 movie, so there's still a little element of 70s naturalism
Absolutely.
going on in the film.
Absolutely.
And they all get what they're there to do. It's great. Everyone's on the same page.
I
It's
watched this movie for the first time probably 10 or 15, 10 or 12 years ago. It was when, do you remember when Warner Archive briefly had their own streaming service?
I do. Yes.
Which then turned into Filmstruck, which then became Criterion.
yes.
Channel.
Back when they were just like, just put them online. Who cares?
Right.
Yeah,
Because this
right.
movie was out of circulation for a while,
Sure.
still is not on Blu-ray.
Is that right?
Correct,
I
unfortunately.
bought it on iTunes.
But when I had become
Big
like
brag.
sort of breast-pilled,
Very good.
Thank you.
Ding.
Thank you.
Just putting a little. I have an abacus here, and you just got a point. I just.
When I was just sort of
Comedy abacus.
sticking my nose in between breasts,
Motorboating
All
between
right.
It's gone. It went away.
You ruined it
I
so
went too far.
quickly.
You
I saw
were-
this film was on the Warner Archive thing, and I was like, oh, that movie's actually kind of hard to see. And I watched it and loved it, and have like cited it to people as sort of an undersung gem. And then rewatched it last night, and I, about like 15 minutes in, was like, is this a full bore masterpiece? Do I think this is like a great American
I think it's a
movie
very
with capital
good
letters?
I think there's little complaint you can have about it. It is small, right? It's like,
Yeah.
100% it's small.
you know, but that's to its credit.
Yes,
that,
it's
you know,
restrained
it's
and
restrained.
it's modest, but that's part
Yes.
of its power.
Thank you.
100%.
And
Like,
then later, Mr. Brest will actually lean into grander stories.
Gets very big.
yes, and the saxophone
and will
will
lean into,
come in on the score.
and
And, yeah.
after his great success in these big-breasted comedy hits.
Well, and we're back.
Then when you're in the Son of the Woman and Meet Joe Black, you're
Yes.
telling grander stories,
Yes.
which are novelistic. Whereas this apparently was actually based on a short story,
Mhm.
and the movie is like a short story,
Yeah.
and that's its power.
Yeah.
The economy and the smallness of it is actually the power of the film.
It might just
I
be
agree.
the mood I'm in or whatever. But last night, this was hitting me so hard. And part of it was just like my deep appreciation for the simple power of it.
Of course.
Yeah.
I have no objection.
And
I
yeah,
was
it's-
completely impressed by this movie. Yes.
And I was just thinking, I don't remember if I'd seen it before I watched it for this
Oh, wow.
podcast, and I remember when it came out because I
Yeah.
was in high school in 1979,
Mhm.
and one thing I've always remembered for some reason is
Same
an
year as
interview.
Tom Conti was on
An
Broadway.
interview that George
Wow.
Burns, did
Mhm.
about promoting the movie, and I remember
Going in
George Burns
style. That's maybe a little close.
I had it for a second.
going
Okay, cool.
in style. But I remember an interview where George Burns said it's directed by this very smart kid, Martin Brest. I remember him calling him very smart.
Yeah.
Mm.
And then he gave an example of this, and he said that George Burns said that he had ad-libbed a line,
Mhm.
and that Martin Brest said, that's a very funny George Burns joke, but it's not a good Al joke.
Mm.
George is, or rather Joe. Joe
Yeah.
is
Yeah, yeah.
George's
Yes.
character. And then George Burns appreciated that.
Yeah.
And then said to the interviewer, you see what I mean? Smart. And for some reason that has stayed with me for like 40
Well-
years, that little...
If I were directing Going in Style,
Yeah.
if I were for some reason at the age of 20, whatever, 27, put in charge of these three guys,
Yeah.
I would.
Three legends, basically.
Three legends, two Oscar winners
Yeah.
here, and then Lee Strasberg, who's no slouch.
Recent nominee.
Recent nominee, of course.
Yeah.
And they started doing bits.
Yeah.
I would certainly be too afraid, I think, to try and rein George Burns in. And yet clearly that is how he got such a wonderful performance out of him.
It is astounding that he had the level of insight as a 27-year-old to execute this movie as both a writer and a director in terms of the subject matter, right? And the specificity of it. It is astounding the level of like command he had over craft. But in a way, the single most impressive thing is that he earned the respect and trust of those three guys as a 27-year-old. That they not only like agreed to do the movie, but in the dossier that JJ put together, there's like quotes from all three of them where they were like 2 days in, I was like, this guy knows what he's doing. I trust him. I'm in his hands.
We will, yeah,
That's
exactly.
fantastic.
We will discuss it. I mean, it's so weird. Considering he got started in his 20s,
Yeah.
Martin Brest should have like 20 films under his belt.
He was already spacing them out before,
Yeah, before
The
he
si-
stopped making them.
right, before G. Lee,
Right.
lands like an atom
Right.
bomb.
It's anyway, okay. So what do you know about Martin Brest? Because I can tell you some things. Born in 1951, August 8th,
In the Bronx.
my wedding anniversary.
In the
Well,
boogie down
well,
Bronx.
In the Bronx.
In the boogie
That's right. Jewish, Eastern European immigrants.
Mhm.
They give him a classic, Bronx Jew upbringing, I feel like.
David was miming a stamp.
It's just a lot of laundry out on the line, right?
Yeah, go on further. Come on.
You got your Manhattan
Yes.
Italian Martin
Sure.
a little earlier.
Scorchese.
Little
Sure, down a
older.
little
And now you,
Cobblestone
got,
streets.
your Bronx Jewish Martin.
Yes.
taking the
And they're circling around each other.
taking the Grand Concourse line and going to the
That's right.
going to the deli.
Right. And you got Martin Ritt on the other side of the country going, what about
Yeah,
me?
yeah. What about me?
Let's see. This is he says, I remember my father sitting at the table reading the Jewish paper, and I was watching television, and a dog food commercial came on, and he looked up and he saw.
Damn it. Martin Ritt was born in New York City, in the Bronx.
Well, there you go. Hang your head in shame. Let me finish this dog food anecdote.
Please. Sorry.
This is Martin Brest. His father looks up and sees not only do they make special food for dogs in America, whereas anyone of his family would starve to death under millions of circumstances, but they advertise it. And my father looked up and he said in Yiddish, "Das ist America."
And
Like that
dog
kind of
food-
thing
And
of
that
like-
was a Chuck Wagon commercial directed by Marty DeBurgi, the director of This Is Spinal Tap.
And that is when Martin Brest fell in love with cinema, of
Yes.
course.
Exactly.
Yes.
But I do love that idea of like these sort of immigrant Jews being
Yeah.
like, this is why we came here, and yet also I will never understand quite what this is, this country.
Yes.
That we
And
came.
it's Meshuggah.
Yes. All right.
Loves the honeymooners, relates to the honeymooners, according to the Wikipedia
That makes
excerpt
sense.
I read.
He went to Stuyvesant High School. Which obviously is a
Smarty
public
Pants Public
you
School,
test
specialty high
into.
school. Yeah.
That's where
Brest-
Malcolm Barrett went, I believe.
Yeah, that you are correct. You are correct.
He
And I
went to
only know that
Stuyvesant as
because
well?
I just
Yeah.
Googled him.
Wow.
He went
Yeah.
to Sty.
Okay.
Marty says it was like Stalag 17. No one would bathe. Everyone was horny as hell. All these extraordinarily bright working class to lower middle class kids, a lot of them schlepping in from the Bronx or Brooklyn with their monster briefcases.
Mhm.
It's an interesting time. He went to NYU, which his father thought was not sensible. He went as a film major. So this would have been in like the 60s.
Yes.
The late 60s. My mom has a very close friend who went to NYU, and he likes to say, I went to NYU and it was bad. Because NYU became this like hot school. But like back in the 60s and 70s, it was a very like, not a glitzy school in the slightest.
No,
like,
the other fascinating thing is that by his own account, he was not like a major cinephile. It almost feels a little arbitrary that he ended up landing there and then the sort of passion
no,
grew.
he says not right. Like he was not talking about Antonioni and how to move the camera. And
But it also-
he said, I was
yeah.
like, why would you want to move the camera? I like the Little Rascals. Like, just
Right.
point the camera at him.
And he
Yeah.
even says, like, his favorite thing growing up were Little Rascals, which, quote, technically are horrendous, bad angles, terrible editing, and I almost couldn't shake that sort of dopey technique.
That's interesting. I mean, because this movie's obviously simply made.
Right.
But, like, I would not call it amateurish or,
But it's
like,
also-
badly done.
It's
right.
not like he was like, well, I was so studious about The Little Rascals, I came to film school trying to continue the tradition of Hal Roach. He was just kind of like, yeah, there's like some movies I liked. He, like a lot of people, credits The $1 Million Movie. I think a lot of people of his generation will talk about The $1 Million Movie, which was a channel where they would play the same movie multiple times within the given week.
And it was often an
sure.
old classic film. This
Yes,
is back,
right.
and I
It's
remember
something they got for cheap.
I remember
right.
the
Yeah.
end of this era because I was born in '63
Sure.
in New Jersey, and we got all the New York stations.
Mhm.
So the first old movie I fell in love with was King Kong
Oh, yeah.
because I think it was either Channel 9 or Channel 11. I forget which one.
Mhm.
But one of those local channels, for some reason, every Thanksgiving they would show King Kong,
Yeah.
which makes no sense. There's no Thanksgiving theme. I mean, they give thanks that they've caught King Kong
Yeah.
up to a point.
Yes.
But then,
But
'twas
but
beauty.
I was entranced by all the mysterious quality of this 1930s black and white film with this early stop motion. There was something very compelling to me about that. And I'm sure that's the same way to a lot of people who like these old films, but there's also something about the distance of them that actually draws you to them.
I feel like I just heard a lot of major film people of this generation talk about, especially grew up in the tri-state area, the influence of the $1 Million Movie, where because of whatever licensing agreement they had, whatever movie was playing that week would play 9 times within that given week.
Yeah.
It would play every day and twice on the weekends. And he was like, it's not like I was a movie obsessive, but I really was starting to teach myself from watching the same film 9 times, even if I wasn't obsessed with that
there's
movie.
there's no home video. There's
Right.
nothing like that.
It was
So
the
you
only
just
way.
kind of stumble upon these things, which are just shown locally. And if you have some incipient desire to do this or
Yes.
some connection to it that you don't even understand yet, that's very powerful.
His
Seeing these images.
his quote was, to be able to see the same movie 4 or 5 times in 1 week was a revelation because you could start to see, even if you were unconsciously looking at it, if you felt the experience, you were able to then somehow subliminally see how that experience was constructed to make the impact on you.
Proto film school.
Yeah.
100%. And then he goes to actual film school. His father wanted him to become, I want to check here, a sheet metal worker,
Makes sense?
an apprentice in Local 28.
Mhm.
He says, you're going to make $400 a week if you do that. And he said, Papa, I want to be a director. I got to dance. It seems like Martin
That's
Brest
right.
is really funny. Like,
he seems
JJ's
very
been
funny.
warning us that this guy is very
Wait,
quotable.
he actually said I got to dance like Adam Goldberg in the film.
Yeah,
He
Dazed and
claims he
Confused.
says this.
It's
I think he's
written
joking.
phonetically in the
Gotta
interview.
dance.
Right.
I get it. It's a metaphor.
But he was a
right.
classic comedy. It was Laurel and Hardy and Chaplin and the Little
Chaplin.
Rascals.
The Honeymooners.
Like,
and then
Honeymooners,
he ends up casting Art Carney.
Carney,
Yeah.
yes, of course.
who was the only one of the 3 guys who he wrote the part for.
That's
Really?
interesting.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
He conceived as Art
Like-
Carney as the Owl.
Now, you're too young to have been watching The Honeymooners live, right? That was a 50s show.
Yeah, it's 50s.
But
But
it was
it
obviously
was
heavily in
heavy
repeats,
syndication in
Yeah.
New York. It was on like every day at like 11 o'clock.
The way he talks about it is the way a lot of people that I, boomers that I know, I'm not saying boomers now like everyone's mean about.
David's holding up an accusatory finger.
Where this is a show about working class people. Like it was the first show they'd ever seen about working class.
This is,
people.
by the way, there's an old Burns and Schreiber who were a comedy
oh, yeah.
team.
Yeah.
There's an old Burns
Avery
and Schreiber
Schreiber.
routine where Avery Schreiber is talking to Burns, and Burns says, Burns like an Irish guy.
Yeah.
So you're a Jew? Excuse me. And then Schreiber says, hey, Jew's not a derogatory term. So I just like, boomer's not necessarily a
Sure,
derogatory
exactly,
term,
right.
even though it can be used that
This
way.
is now everyone, you just
Okay,
you forget how to do anything. You're
I
a
just
boomer.
wanted to chime that, hey, boomer's not a derogatory term.
Exactly, but no, like
But your
like,
point is that
he's saying
the sitcoms used to be about sort of idealized, perfect families,
Often.
and right.
the
sure.
Honeymooners, they live in Brooklyn. They're
Yeah.
working class. They
Yeah.
have blue collar jobs. And he says this was a show made for my neighborhood. Ralph Cramden, the angry soul whose spirit blossoms. That was
Sure.
a character he really.
Yeah, and it's Jackie Gleason is street.
Yeah.
He's got a street quality.
Yeah.
Very different than
and also, of course,
Father Knows Best or whatever.
Yeah.
right. Okay, so he goes to NYU. He crossed over with Amy Heckerling. He was friends with her there.
They dated.
Yes, they dated.
She has an amazing quote about him. I'm two here. She said, he was the coolest. There were a few people that everybody knew were going to make it, and he was one of them. And then her other quote was, sometimes he does such stupid, self-destructive things that you just want to punch him. When we were going out, I can't count how many broken bones he had.
Amazing.
By
They
the
do
way,
sort of talk about
Martin
him
Brest,
like
of course,
this sort
is
of...
in Fast
that
Times.
I have met Amy Heckerling, and she is a cool lady.
She seems cool as
So
hell.
that was very good. That Marty snagged Amy Heckerling.
That's a
pretty cool.
powerful endorsement.
And she has a very attractive New York accent.
Oh, yeah.
He pops up briefly on camera in Hot Dogs for Gauguin, and
He looks fucking hot,
he
man.
looks hot as hell.
No, he's even really cute in Fast Times. He's in
Handsome man.
the autopsy.
He's short.
scenes.
Hot dogs for Gauguin. He's on the subway with Rhea Perlman.
Yes.
Yes.
And
Danny DeVito's in
I'm
it,
watching
of
it
course.
going,
Who is that? guy?
who's this? Who's
Yeah.
this young slice?
I'm not saying.
And then at the end,
Yes.
I saw the credits and went, "That was Martin Brest."
I'm not saying he aged
Who's this
poorly,
slice?
but you have not watched Hot Dogs for Gauguin
Not yet.
Right,
No,
yeah.
no.
He's got this little smirk on his face.
It does jump out where you're like, that's a fucking pretty
Now,
man.
he and Amy were walking into parties in 1970, and people were like, "What just happened?
Yeah.
We can't compete with these two.
All right. So
He
We
makes-
can't
he's
compete
assured-
with Hecker Breast."
He's a Hecker Breast. He's
Bresterling.
confident. Okay, so
Bresterling.
he makes Hot Dogs for Gauguin. It's very well regarded.
With
Yes.
an unknown
It's
Danny
got
DeVito.
Mr. Danny DeVito and of course Rhea Perlman, future husband and wife
Right.
there.
It's sort of pointed to like almost like the fabled Godspell performance of like all of these people when they were unknown worked
Right.
on this one thing together.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
The DP is Jacques Hitkin, who's
Yeah.
well known for shooting Wes Craven movies. He
Right,
did
like,
Nightmare on Elm Street.
Almost everyone involved in this went on to have a serious career. For a
William
student
Duff
film.
Griffin is his friend, who was actually a
Yeah.
very prominent stage actor in New York back in the 70s and stuff.
Applies to AFI with it. They
Mm-hmm.
they initially apparently had rejected him, but then they saw the short film and they accepted him to become
Yes.
an AFI student.
By his own admission, he wrote a sort of like, I don't know, fuck you kind of admissions essay.
Right.
And they were like, who's this punk? And then when they saw the movie, they were like, we kind of can't question this guy. But Hot Dogs for Gauguin,
let's skip past that because we're going to talk about hot dogs later.
Sure,
We
sure.
can't do the whole origin. Let's do the origin story of Going in Style. Okay.
okay.
Edward Cannon.
The point is, though, he
well
goes from
regarded.
that to AFI, he makes Hot Tomorrows, and Hot Tomorrows gets sort of sent around Hollywood.
Right.
The studios see it and they go, this guy undeniably knows how to make a picture. He pitches this idea for Going in Style.
Well, Edward Cannon.
Yeah.
The film was originally called Stepping Out, which is a pretty bad title.
Going in Style is a very good title.
Much better. Edward Cannon, a 49-year-old carpenter from Queens, had this idea for a story about old men seeking glory via bank robbery, records it to tape.
Wow.
It gets in the hands of Leonard Gaines, a friend of Marty Brest's, who is the producer on this movie. This guy gives the tape to Brest, and
Fascinating.
Brest buys the rights to it. It's it's not really even a short story. It's like
Now-
someone just said an idea
So-
for a movie.
This
and just
movie's
take
based
it.
on a cassette.
You know, there was another famous carpenter who told parables and didn't
that's
write
true.
them down.
Yeah.
Other people had to
Sort
spread
of the
his
tape
words.
recorder
And
of
I
his
think he
day
also had a
was-
Queen's accent. if
Yes,
that's
was
what
the
we
mount.
say.
Well, it depends if Martin Scorsese's making
Consider
a
the
movie.
lilies. Consider the lilies.
He
So wait, this guy just recorded this thing, and it just
I
made
mean,
its way.
is it truly just the guy being like, there's these three guys, they're old guys,
Yeah.
you know, and they want to rob a bank, so they do that. You know, I don't know how much of his idea
So
is
this was
here.
never published.
No. Never published.
Fascinating.
And
Yeah.
it doesn't have a credit in the movie, obviously.
It's
just written and
literally
directed by
like
Martin
based on a
Brest.
story said out loud.
Yeah, I think the movie has a credit
The
saying
grand
based
oral
on a
tradition.
story by Edward Cannon.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, okay, you're right. It does. Okay.
But I didn't realize the story was just something he recorded on his Radio Shack cassette
Yeah.
into the condenser
We don't
mic.
know that it was Radio Shack.
Oh, yes, it was.
We don't-
Trust me.
Okay. So Brest goes,
He
pitches
takes it-
this movie to Warner Brothers.
Warner Brothers, that's right. Yes.
They go, sounds good. Let's find a writer for it. They go around looking for a writer. No one's biting. He's like, can I just take a strike at this?
Brest, in the Bronx fashion, does the wiggling thumbs to himself.
This guy right here.
Writer right here.
But they almost treat it like, I don't know, why not? We'll have someone else rewrite his thing. At least it like gets a first draft out. And everyone's like, this script is fucking great.
Jay Preston Allen is busy.
Yeah.
He's,
Right. There were 3 writers at that time.
he's handed
Yeah, William Goldman couldn't do it.
Right.
he's handed $5.5 million budget, which is a major budget, obviously.
Yeah.
So they're like, you better cast some real actors here. Art Carney, as you say, was the only choice for Al.
Yeah.
But the original choice for Lee Strasberg's part of Willie was an actor called Barnard Hughes.
Barnard Hughes, a fine actor.
Another, I feel like a guy where it's like you have seen him in at least one movie as an old guy. He had a very good long old guy
Only
career.
like played old guys his whole life. He's in Midnight Cowboy playing an old
He's
guy.
in Doc Hollywood. He's in tons of stuff.
Yeah.
And Burgess Meredith.
Oh my
Makes
God.
a ton
as
of
the George
sense.
Burns guy.
And would have killed on his own. Would have killed on his own terms. One of the great actors.
Absolutely.
of all time.
A legendary stickman.
A legendary stickman, but also just like the wrinkles and crags on
And the
his
voice
face.
comes
The
out of a
voice.
different place, a different acting style.
He's more.
But unfortunately, the most famous actor in Hollywood was George Burns. He had just won an Oscar like 3 years ago for Sunshine
amazing
Boys.
career resurgence.
Right.
I mean,
and then he
we're
did
gonna-
Oh God,
Yeah,
which was like a hit.
We have to pull over to the side of the road for a second to just explain the bizarre phenomenon of George Burns, right? This sort of like old vaudevillian man.
It's sort of like Betty White or something, like that kind of thing of like a sixth act for this
But you realize
performer. Yeah.
George Burns is not in a movie between 1949 and 75. Is that right?
39
39.
and 75. He's
Here's
in
this guy-
he's in Honolulu in
Right.
1939, a classic old Golden
This
Age musical, and then
legendary,
the Sunshine
like
Boys.
fucking couples act of Burns and Allen, right?
He's
His
a-
wife
he's a-
Gracie Allen.
Exactly.
He goes from being a vaudeville guy to a radio guy to a TV guy.
Huge in radio, and then like a lot of people of
Yeah,
that
like-
generation saw the opportunity for TV. Lucille Ball's another one.
Right.
Right.
And then became a huge TV star, and actually did some very inventive stuff. Famously, like his TV was like the template for the first not Larry Sanders,
Sure.
but the
Whatchamacallit? Yes.
the one before.
It's Gary Shandling show.
Gary Shandling show where he
Yes.
talks to the. And I remember at the time everyone was like, "This is like the George Burns show where he talked to the camera."
Yes.
They're
Yeah.
bringing that back.
I've never seen Burns and Allen, but he's the straight man, right? Like she's the wacky
This
one,
is the
right?
thing. Yes, George Burns' comedy thing is he's the straight man and she's flighty and says wacky, crazy stuff.
Right. And
He
he's
goes,
like, okay.
"What are you talking about?
Right,
what
right,
did you
right,
say?"
Right.
But then, he has. But then she retires in the 50s. The two
Yes.
of them as a double act were as big as anybody in comedy. In
They were
show
married
business.
for 40 years.
She was long dead by the time this movie came. She dies
Right.
in 64.
His
Yeah.
famous catchphrase, I mean, their line was, say goodnight, Gracie. And then she would say, goodnight, Gracie.
Yes.
The classic joke of,
It's pretty funny.
yeah, but when people would do impressions of George Burns, that's what
Yeah.
they would say. They were so associated with each other. She passes away. You have to imagine people viewed it as like, well, look, these dinosaurs of a bygone era of American entertainment. She passed away. He probably will die in the next 2 years.
She'd retired a few years before she
Right.
died.
Yeah.
So then he's solo, and then actually he's very successful as a TV producer. He did other TV shows that he starred in that she wasn't in, and then she dies, and then go on. I don't mean
there's
to
just-
No,
take-
you're right.
I
I mean,
feel like-
he mostly does TV, and he does like he'll play Carney.
And then what was the first big? Is the Sunshine Boys the
It's
first?
the
it.
one
Sunshine
that-
Boys.
It's it. Like,
It's
this
his
is the
comeback.
thing. When people are so like kind of inextricably tied to each other and like creative partnerships like that, and especially like very, very long marriages, you often find that like if one person dies, the other one dies pretty shortly thereafter.
Sure.
There's some sort of like symbiotic relationship of they were so dependent on each other, the other person sort of loses the will.
Yes.
And it's like George Burns is still alive. His wife, who he was always associated with, has passed. He's still around, but it's in this sort of like elder statesman capacity.
And also, when he was a young man,
Yeah.
he was kind of puttering around vaudeville and just hadn't broken through.
Yeah.
And then when he met her
It was
and
the
they
key.
became a double act, that
Mm.
was what made it all happen.
yeah.
So and that his strength, which was that very sort of restrained, I'm just kind of dealing with the situation. And then it's always about his dryness set against something.
Yes.
So when his career explodes, it's because that when he came out by himself in vaudeville, it wasn't set against anything, and it wasn't landing.
Right.
Then when it's set against this kind of woman doing this kind of crazy lady thing. By the way, Gracie Allen was a very talented comedian
Yes.
and really, really funny, like really good.
But she was the energy of the act.
And the two of them also have a wonderful sort of spontaneity. They're doing all these scripted jokes, but
Mm-hmm.
there's a real sort of spontaneity in life if you listen to their radio show. And I haven't seen a lot. I've seen some of the TV show, but she was really, really good. But it's all about her energy sort of set against his dryness.
Yes.
And then when The Sunshine Boys happens, which was a Broadway play that he wasn't in.
So the whole thing with it, right, was that it was supposed to be first it was supposed to be Hope and Crosby. This is The Sunshine Boys is a Herbert Ross.
Oh, the movie version.
The movie version. They
Fascinating.
They decide. I think it's Neil Simon is like, absolutely not. You need Jewish performers.
It's
like,
a movie
you can't do
about
that.
old vaudevillian guys.
Right.
Yes.
Then they decide Red Skelton and Jack Benny. Okay. Red Skelton realizes
Not bad. I don't trust Red Skelton to deliver the goods.
Red Skelton
go on.
realizes
You know
he
the
can
thing
make
about Red Skelton too. Also,
He's annoying.
never
made
had a
Lloyd
dinner.
That's Red Buttons did.
God damn it!
You got the wrong Red.
Oh my god!
Red Button's better actor than Red Skelton.
Oh my god!
You can't pull out the wrong Red in front of Jimmy Urbaniak, Griffin Newman.
I would be embarrassed making that mistake under any circumstances.
By the
but
way,
to
this
make it in
is
front
so.
of you
I
is
am the character
worst
in that
case
sketch.
scenario.
I'm embarrassed for myself that I corrected you.
And I'm embarrassed that I forced you to correct me.
Red
But
Skelton.
I appreciate the effort.
Yeah.
Red Skelton realizes he can make more money on the road than being in the Sunshine Boys. So
And
he
also,
drops out.
he's annoying and not fun.
Yes.
Jack Benny realizes that
Kind of a
he is
blowhard.
old and
Yes.
he dies.
Has pancreatic cancer.
He does.
Jack
And
Benny
so
would have been great. Jack
Benny would have been
Benny
great.
would have killed it.
George
Benny,
Burns
much
was
bigger star, and was a
Yes.
close friend of George Burns.
Right.
Isn't it?
George-
By the way, can I just do a sidebar? Do you know who was in the original Broadway cast?
No.
Sam Levine, not the Star Freaks and Gates.
Okay.
That'd be
different.
weird because he would have.
There was an
quite
older
young.
actor named Sam Levine.
Okay.
Anyway, I was a great guy. Was in the original Guys and Dolls and
Mhm.
stuff, and did movies. And Jack Albertson, Chico and the
Oh.
Man, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate
Yes.
Factory.
Oh,
Yes.
sure. Yeah.
But the two of them were not considered, despite the
Bankable.
splendor of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
Right.
Were not considered maybe big enough.
George
right,
Burns
that's the
is-
thing. They're not big enough. George Burns is essentially Jack Benny's very good friend, and he's subs in.
Last minute
In
substitution.
grief, he's very sad.
With Walter
and then
Matthau.
Walter
playing older,
Matthau, who's probably in his 50s.
is doing the sort of Art Carney age up.
And Walter Matthau has a very flamboyant acting style
Yes.
and is really getting into, I'm an old Jewish vaudevillian.
Well, but
and it's great. I love Matthau in the movie.
I do too.
But
yes.
again, part of the power of Burns is it's
He's
his
the real
dryness
deal.
set against
well, Matthau,
mayhem.
I mean,
So
it's one of
now
the
he-
rare films in which he mugs. He never really would, but
But I think it works for the character
does, it does.
because he's this old vaudevillian who's striving. But again, here's the power of Burns. You set him against something, so it was Grace and her flighty ideas.
Yeah.
Now it's Matthau and his kind of hyper
right.
old
and Burns
vaudevillian
is-
who doesn't want to stop. And Burns' character is past it. He's retired. He doesn't want to get the old team back together. So you have the perfect setup
Yes.
for Burns' strength, which is his, it's David Spade and Chris Farley, if you
But
will, if I
George-
may be permitted a
Please,
comparison.
absolutely. George Burns.
It's the nut and the guy who's like, just come on, let's just.
George Burns,
100%.
a man who was born in the 1800s,
Yes.
whose first on-camera credit is Lamb Chops, an 8-minute Vitaphone comedy short,
Mm.
and then doesn't appear in a film for over 30 years.
36 years.
Gets this part like as a last-minute sub-in for his friend,
Yep.
and wins an Oscar.
Wins an Academy Award at the age of 80. He was the oldest Oscar winner in the history of the Academy
And
Awards
he's
until Jessica
fucking
Tandy.
great in that movie.
Yeah.
But what's astounding is you have to imagine people were like, what a nice sort of a stage bow for this legendary
I mean,
career.
I think that's partly why he won the Oscar. Of course, it was right. It was God bless you. You're back.
And
Now, not
Instead
only
of
is he
swan
back,
song.
now
Yeah.
he's hot again.
The public decides you are an A-list
Yeah.
movie star.
We want more of this guy in movies.
vehicles. We're building movies around you. You're going to have your own
no,
trilogy.
not just that. They're like, who would you work best with? John Denver. That's right. The two of you will be playing God,
But
George
he does
Burns.
a two-hander with Brooke Shields.
Does he? What's that one?
That one's called, what's it called? That's not Just You and Me, Kid.
I thought that was a remake of. Is that a remake of Lamb Chops? By the way,
It might be.
The story of two juvenile delinquents.
But yes,
He's-
he does Oh God, Just You
Yes.
and Me, Kid, Going in Style, Oh God, Book 2.
Of course.
2 of a
18 again,
kind.
which is a sort of body swap comedy. Type
Yes.
thing.
Oh God, You Devil, and 18 again. And that's basically the end of his run from 75 to 88. And you're like, well, at that point, he's really old. He must have retired, right? He must have died soon after. He lives another 8 years. He makes it to 100.
He lived to be 100 years old.
I remember watching him show up on like award shows and variety specials as a kid in the mid 90s and being like, this is the oldest man who has ever lived. This is like a dinosaur is presenting an award. Like, how are there still people alive who span the entirety of American popular comedy?
Right.
It felt like he was this living history.
He's like 4 years older than the 20th century
Yes.
itself.
Yes.
And at that point, he has outlived his like victory lap Oscar when everyone was like, this guy's probably got 18 months left on this mortal coil.
Yeah.
And Going in Style is just part of this, like, his I can do anything I want era of his career.
It's estimated he smoked 300,000 cigarettes during his lifetime.
Cool.
Starting at the age of 14. Never smoked a cigarette, never used marijuana, saying, I can't get any more kicks than I'm
Cigars,
getting.
you mean. He smoked cigars.
Not
Yes.
cigars.
Because
Sorry,
that was his go-to
His thing.
prop for the bulk of his comedy
got the
career.
cigar.
By the way, he's cigar-less in Going in Style.
Yeah.
I feel like, again, right, to make you realize, like, he's not just doing his shtick here. Like, he's playing a real guy
Different
here.
glasses.
He's playing a real guy,
too.
but the thing is,
he
again,
doesn't have the round glasses.
and he is really giving a performance here. It's a character with a lot of dimension, but it's still the thing of the George Burns dryness set against something. And in this
Yes.
case, it's set against the insanity of his idea, of
Yes.
the plot. So that's
But
where
he plays it so
Okay.
fucking straight.
This is a really good George Burns line, though.
Sure.
So they call him, he's 83 years old when he makes this movie.
yeah.
Bob
And
Shap-
if he's in the other room, he doesn't even know the phone is ringing. Like the maid has to tell him because he can't hear it.
Bob Shapiro, the producer, says,
Mm-hmm.
George called me on the phone and said, when you said the director was young, I didn't think you meant this young. I've got ties older than him.
Yes.
Sure.
It's a great line.
Incredible line.
But he liked, like you say, he liked the director.
Mm-hmm.
He and Marty sat down and tried on 150 different pairs of glasses to find a new look because they were like, we can't have your usual glasses.
Brest's just really smart about understanding what aspects of George Burns' star persona are useful for this movie and which ones do you have to push to the side
'Cause in
to
his-
make him stand as
And
its
his
own
comedy
character.
persona, he's kind of natty.
Yeah.
He's really put together.
Right.
If you
He's-
watch
he's
him on
fancy
TV,
man.
he wears really nice suits. His hair is he looks crisp.
Mhm.
And he's got these kind of stylish big glasses that he wore when he got older, but they look kind of stylish.
You
Like,
go to the club with him.
he looks successful and kind of hip for an old guy.
Yes.
And in this, he looks frumpy.
Yeah.
And he's playing kind of a grumpy frump.
I
or
mean-
a frumpy grump. If
I mean,
you
a
will.
country club, to be clear, not like Studio 54.
I got you.
Although,
Yeah.
he probably was hitting 50.
He probably would tear it up if you
Oh,
let him.
please.
Yeah.
Taking cocaine with Truman Capote and Bianca Jagger.
So he's in his 80s, and as you said, Art Carney's actually younger. He's in his 60s.
Yeah.
Lee Strasberg's in his mid-70s. This is his last performance, basically, and he dies a couple years after this
Yeah,
movie.
it was a smaller version of what George Burns experienced, but this guy who like synthesized the method, took from Stanislavski and built this whole sort of like school of acting thought in New York City and was seen as this guru to so many of the guys who become the big leading men of
Not
the
so
70s.
much started as an actor, but became known as a great acting teacher.
And talked about that, like when he became obsessed with acting, he was like, I know what I look like. I don't have like star energy. I probably would not have the greatest career trying to pursue acting, but I'm so in love with this art
Do I want to
form."
keep going to the lobby and signing in when I'm 75?
Right.
Lee Strasberg,
He
writers
didn't
and artists.
have many acting credits. It wasn't a thing he seriously pursued. It was Pacino who really wanted him to play Hyman Roth in Godfather Part 2, which he gets an Oscar nomination for. And suddenly it's like,
Gordon Willis shoots those tufts on his chest so well, too.
That's right.
but it's another thing where like George Burns, people are like, God, we have this guy who's like this living history of this like important movement.
But I think
And now he's having his moment in the star, in the spotlight.
There's a nice meta thing of casting Hyman Roth as well, because Strasberg's character Going in Style is the meekest member of the team.
right, he's not a terrifying
He's not a
Mayor
psychotic
Lansky-esque. Yeah, right.
gangster who will kill people at will.
But he has a run of like 4 or 5 years of doing a lot of movies, and this is his last one.
Strasberg says, I was not sure why Brest wanted me because these are two comic actors. That's not really my thing. But Brest said he wanted characters who appeared real and natural. The comedy would come from that. And Strasberg was like, okay, well, that makes sense to me. Like, I can't do gags for you, but I
Yeah.
can play a real guy.
Which he does astoundingly well. I mean, this is like a
He's
stunning
so good in
performance.
this. I love him in The Godfather, but that does kind of feel more like Pacino being like, Master Strasberg, and like, it's all restraint and it's brilliant and all that. But he's so wonderful. This is like an acty role.
He has his one big monologue in this that is devastating, but also just any time he's just sort of sitting in a shot, the presence of this guy, like the weight of this guy. I mean, like they're all playing different approaches to dealing with their age, and Burns feels like angry. Like Burns is frustrated at how old he is and how he is viewed by society. And Strasberg just seems so like bereft. He is so deeply sad.
And this is the interesting thing, which is why do these guys do that? And there's not a lot of explaining. Apparently in the remake, they do the classic remake thing.
Yes.
Like, Willy Wonka didn't get enough chocolate when he was a kid.
I refused to watch the remake, but I was horrified to learn that it disobeys everything that's good.
I read a review and I thought, it's one of these things where they try to spell it out too much. But they're very distinct characters, and Burns does seem to have some kind of Burns's character has some sort of anger going on. That makes this happen. And yes, Strasberg's character is bereft. Strasberg's character is living with regret. And there's this moving monologue he has about this incident where he spanked his son, and then the son died young, and they never got past that event.
He didn't even make it to 18, the boy.
Which I assume
that line
means
is crushing. The boy,
and I'm guessing,
either died in the war or killed himself.
I'm guessing it suggests that he died in World War II.
That
would be the generation.
That was my guess.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then Strasberg, they never reconciled. And
it
so
was never the
Strasberg
same between us.
lives with this regret.
Yeah.
But just the fact that, like, I watched the monologue twice because I was I was so in it, and then I was like, wait, what was the boy's transgression? I've already lost the thread. And then you go back and he's like, I don't even know what it was.
Exactly.
I don't know what he'd done. Like, can't remember.
But I had the
He'd done
exact same
something.
experience. I replayed it and watched the monologue twice in a row because I got so engrossed in the acting that I actually was missing the meat of what he was saying. I was like, this performance, the emotion he's conjuring. And up until that point, I mean, he dies, spoilers, at the 40-minute mark.
Right, he's the first to go in the terrifying slasher movie-esque.
Yeah,
sort of one guy dies at the end of every act of this movie,
and he has the least dialogue of the
Burns
three of them up until that point. That monologue comes like 30 minutes in, and up until then, he's mostly just this sad, quiet guy, and just the feeling of regret within him is so palpable. He is just like silently conveying it in every single moment that when the explanation comes, which Strasberg so beautifully underplays, it's like devastating. Right. And that's, I mean, not to get ahead, but that's where I really click into like, this movie isn't just the sort of high concept version of wouldn't it be funny if grandpa's robbed a bank. This is like a pretty sobering meditation.
And there's also a very, there's not a very big point put on it, but there's some mild social commentary.
Yes.
These are three working class guys.
Yep. They live in Queens.
They live in Queens. It's we only kind of get hinted. We learned that Strasberg's Willie was a cab driver.
Yep.
And the only other career information we get is at one point, Art Carney's character mentions he worked as a bartender at one point.
Yeah.
And we don't know what George Burns did, but we also learned that neither George nor Art Carney's character have ever been on a plane. So they're basically three provincial guys. Yeah. They live in Queens. They're on Social Security. Which is part of the reason George Burns decides to pull the job. And they're three nobodies.
They're old school guys who no longer really recognize the culture they live in.
They also just have nothing to do.
Yeah.
They seemingly do have families in some sense, but we don't know.
Well, this is interesting
heavy connections to them.
Because Al, Art Carney's character, has a nephew.
Right. The only other speaking character in the film, basically.
Yes.
Yeah. Charles Hallahan.
Hallahan from John Carpenter's The Thing.
Oh,
yep.
Yeah.
His stomach becomes a mouth, and he kills Richard Dysart.
Yes, a great role.
And he did all of that.
He did all that himself.
Yeah, he does all of it himself.
He severed his own head when it grew spider legs.
Yes.
This is all his stomach stuff.
Yeah.
But, I was watching it going, who is this guy? I know this guy. Then I looked him up. Oh, shit, he's part of the crew on The Thing. Of course. Now I remember. Kind of looks like John Ennis.
Yes. That's true.
Ennis.
Yeah.
But anyway, there's just sort of a drift.
Yes.
They're just sort of a drift. They live together. But yeah, he's the only family member. And later in the movie, George Burns looks through a scrapbook and we see a baby, but we don't know that he has any connection with a child.
I believe that those are photos of the real Gracie Allen and George Burns' real
it's
child.
definitely Gracie Allen, and it looks just like her.
Yeah.
But the other question is, like, are his kids estranged? They also do? We don't know.
I think
This
the
is
lack
what I
of
love.
backstory is valuable.
Because, like, again, I'm reading about the Zach Braff remake, which it's Michael Caine, Morgan Freeman, and
Alan Arkin. Like,
Alan
on
Arkin.
paper, you're like, well, it's 3
great.
Academy Award
But then,
winners.
and it's like, oh, their pensions get robbed by an evil bank, or like there's like motivations built into it, which you understand. Some screenwriter looks at this movie, and is like, well, it can't just be like they sit down.
Yes.
And are like, let's rob a bank. That doesn't make any sense. They need to be like getting one over on the man.
And like
least,
Ted Melfi, who wrote it, has this quote that I won't read verbatim, but where he's just like, I hadn't even seen the original movie, but I looked up what it was about, and I was like, 2 of the guys die, and the 3rd one goes to jail. That's not the kind of movie I want to write.
Which, again, I understand when's that movie? 2017? Like, a studio them being like, it can't end like that.
But,
like,
were you saying you feel there should be more backstory?
No.
It's like, what's incredible about this movie is for the first 10 minutes, you're seeing almost wordlessly 3 men with this relationship you don't totally understand, other than it feels like some situation of convenience. 3 old guys who must have known each other for a while, who are not related, who all live together, who don't seem to have strong family ties, even if their family is alive.
Yeah. No, and I agree, because I think there's a strength to later in the movie, George Burns looks at a box of scrapbook type stuff, keepsakes, and there's a picture of him with a baby and a birthday card for a 2-year-old.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I think his daughter's estranged from him.
Yes,
I think she's moved to California, and like he's a mean old man.
Right. These 3 guys didn't end up in a retirement
There's a power
home,
to not really knowing.
but their family's not taking care of them. They just found a way. Somehow they're in an apartment together, and
They're
all they do basically
they go
is
sit in the fucking
they
park.
silently eat breakfast, then they go sit in the park, then they shuffle back home. They hope that their pension check has arrived.
Right.
And then Burns complains about things.
Yeah. But you just
Art
get the
Carney
sense.
kind of puts a bright spin on stuff, and
He's
Lee
the most
Strasberg does
affable.
nothing.
He's the most affable of the trio.
But if Strasberg seems sad and Burns seems angry, Carney just seems kind of mortally bored. As much as he's
And he's also a bit of he's sort of the most innocent of them too.
Yes.
He's a bit naive. Again, they're
bigger. He sort of sticks out a little bit more than the other two.
He's a large man, and he has a kind of one of the things I love about Art Carney's performance, which is magnificent, is that he's sort of employing his comedic vocabulary. You can see sort of Ed Norton, not the eminent movie actor, but Art Carney's character of Ed Norton on The Honeymooners. You see Ed Norton flourishes, but they're done more naturalistically.
I mean, he was
to be clear, he played the actor Ed Norton on The Honeymooners.
Of course.
Yes.
Right.
50 years before
Well,
his
it was
fame.
supposed to be Ed Norton before he broke through.
Right. I got this big audition for Primal Fear. They're looking for an unknown. They actually think it'd be an asset to the role.
He had his Yale diploma on the wall.
Yeah. But Ed Norton's this guy who's was sort of the Bill Irwin of his time and was this hyper physical.
He's the proto Kramer.
Sorry, what did I say?
You
Bill
said
Irwin.
Ed Norton. I mean, and Bill Irwin. No, he is a Bill Irwin.
Art
He's
Carney
a
was Ed
clowny.
Norton, which was a Bill Irwin type performance.
But he has Art Carney in the movie has this. It just comes out as spontaneous behavior.
Yes.
His Honeymooners character is a sitcom character, so he's more heightened. He's more commedia. And in this, like all of them, Art Carney gets the assignment. So all the comic flourishes come out very naturally, and they're behavioral.
And his body had changed so dramatically over decades, where he was always this super bony, lanky guy in relation
he's the skinny
to
guy, and Gleason is
he's got a bit of a
the
paunch
meat hawks.
in this.
Yeah. And he's tall, which makes him so much bigger than the other 2 guys who are sort of shriveled. But he can you see the precision with which he uses his physicality, even if it isn't as broad as what he'd done
But it never
earlier in his
seems
career.
performative in the film. It always comes out of the character and just seems very like just a natural behavioral extension of who he is. He also has all these, and they never seem indulgent or unnecessary. He has all these very interesting little tics that he keeps doing. He'll just do things with his mouth or the way he'll move his face.
Glasses off and kind of taps them.
But it all just seems like behavior, and it's great.
Here's another thing about this movie. I feel and this is also why it probably doesn't work as well remaking it in 2017. This speaks to a certain generation of guys who just do not want to talk about their feelings.
Yeah, well, I was thinking about this though, because these guys
Yeah.
are basically not the World War generation, right? They're in between.
Now, if anything, when George Burns talks about the war, he's talking about the First World War.
So I looked it up. George Burns was rejected from the army for World War I because
funny.
just too funny, because he can't see a goddamn thing, which is
Of
why he
course.
wears, very
Thick-ass
thick
glasses.
glasses.
Yes.
Art Carney actually served in World War II, but Art Carney is kind of playing.
Art Carney was
older
in
here.
combat
Right.
and injured his leg in World War
Oh,
II
wow.
and kind
And-
of had a lifelong limp because of that.
And
what I
Lee,
like.
Lee Strasberg served in World War II. If you said to him, like, you're in World War II, he'd go, I'm joking about method acting. I know.
Imagine you're in World
Right.
War II.
I think
Greatest sense
Strasberg he's probably right on the actual age these guys are supposed to be. And it's like, yeah, these guys didn't actually serve in either war.
Right.
They're weird in-betweener kind of silent, or what's even before the silent
But
generation.
this is my
you
point.
know.
Like, they don't feel like deeply repressed men.
No,
But there is a sense of just like,
meh.
it's what I think this movie sets up so well at the beginning, because when George Burns pitches the plan to
the
do the
lost
stick up,
generation. I'm
the
sorry,
lost
that's what they're
generation.
called.
George Burns pitches the plan to do the stick up maybe 12 or 15 minutes into this movie.
Yeah, because he saw money in a bank.
Right.
To be clear, that is pretty much what gives him the idea.
You've just been watching them putter through the routine for the first 10 minutes. It's deeply captivating. This movie basically opens on extended opening credits over a 3-shot of them just sitting in the park in silence next to each other.
Right, and then one of them rips on a kid in the park.
Yes.
and then
George Burns
Yeah,
does.
he's mean, and then they go home.
But this
And they're
sense of
sitting
like,
around.
these guys might sometimes go full days without uttering a word to each other, and yet they're best friends. They don't talk to anyone else. They don't seem unhappy, but there is a certain
Wait.
kind of
Wait a second.
malaise.
I would say they seem a little unhappy.
Okay,
They
you're
don't
right.
seem happy.
They don't seem happy.
They don't even
Although-
want to watch TV or something. Like, that's the thing. I'm like, guys, turn on the boob
Art
tube.
Carney's Al sings while he's doing the dishes.
He's the happiest.
He's sort of, his default is a little more glass half
They're
full.
bordering on catatonic. And there is this feeling of, and the movie captures it well. I mean, like, Brest sells this well visually, of how much they're sort of just being ignored by their surroundings. Even the way he shoots them, right? It's like they're in the middle of a park where in the foreground of the shot, you have kids like running through sprinklers and all this activity. And then all the way in the background of the shot are just 3 old guys just silently muttering.
By the
to
way, there's
themselves.
also another thing that Martin Brest does really well, which is, and this also feels like it's the tail end of the 70s. It also
Yeah.
feels like very 70s filmmaking vocabulary, but there's a real sense of environmental reality in
Yeah.
this. And and a lot of the shots of of Queens and New York City,
mhm.
it kind of feels like Dog Day Afternoon.
Yes.
Or movies from that era where there's a real sense of reality
Any movie
of the
shot
neighborhood and the environment.
in actual New York City in the 1970s gets so much
It-
power from that.
Yes, it's Astoria, I believe, is where they live, and they're just shooting there. They shot the rest of the movie at Coffin Studios up there, and
Yeah.
then of course they actually go to JFK. They go to the beautiful,
TWA,
old TWA terminal, and
there's a
like
great
a scene in
sequence
Vegas.
a great sequence in Vegas.
but
which
that's
we'll get
it.
to.
But
The most
I have
excitement
some
these
points
guys have.
oh, I like that when they go to Manhattan, George Burns is like, all these people walking.
Yeah,
What's the
don't they
matter with
work
everybody?
anywhere? How come everyone's outside? Don't
he
they
can't
work
even
anywhere?
stand that people live in New York City, essentially. The one thing New York is famous for, having a lot of people in
Yes.
it. Even that annoys him.
Everything annoys them.
Ah,
So they have this Vegas run.
Well, can I say about when they go to get a meal in Vegas to kind of subvert what you normally see in these kinds of movies?
Mhm.
Both of them order cream cheese and jelly sandwiches.
Yeah.
Like Art Carney opens the menu, and I'm like, he's going to order lobster, right? They just won a bunch of money.
it's
but
true.
George
he just gets
Burns-
the same thing that
and
George
it's
cheese
Burns
so
and
gets.
jelly.
because George Burns just orders cream cheese and jelly sandwich, and then Art Carney just looks at this giant menu and says, "I'll have the same."
Right, he can't even begin to
He
get.
doesn't even know where to begin.
And then, of course,
with this lifestyle.
A plus would be then the waitress being like, all right, it's 5 cents extra for jelly. And George Burns is like, forget it. Just cream cheese. No, but I think it's right. Their tastes have not changed. Like their brains have not really expanded. And again, right, like it's not like they're like, we need to high roll now. It's more like they go to Vegas because they feel like they have to do something.
Yeah.
And the scene where Art Carney's looking at the pretty lady
Yes.
at the slot machine.
a sex worker, let's
Yes,
be specific.
she's very beautiful.
Or as you would call her at the time, a hooker.
A woman of the night.
Yes. Like, again, it just kind of feels like that's Like, that's beyond anything they've like considered
Well,
in years.
it's actually a very sweet moment because
Yeah.
he's decides to play a slot machine. He notices this pretty lady looking at him, and he starts to flirt with her in
Yeah.
a very sort of
and it's like, when's the last
sweet
time
way.
he did that?
But he doesn't realize that she's working.
Sure.
And also,
And then
Burns,
George Burns
yes,
comes up behind him and gives her a little shake of the head, like,
okay,
"No, we
come
don't
on,
need your
back
business
off.
now."
Yeah, yeah.
But Art Carney has no idea that was a.
And then
part of it
Carney
is-
dies anyway. You could have at least, jeez.
Because for
given
the
him a
like the
send-off.
first time in a long time, this guy believes like I could be noticed. I feel like I exist again.
He's using a muscle he's not
Exactly.
used in
Yeah.
20, 30 years.
And just his sort of, he's just experiencing joy again. They both are.
Yeah.
And they're both in a quiet way. They're both exhilarated.
Yeah.
Just by being out having a good time together.
They
And
go
it
back to
literally
their
kills them.
right. They go back to their apartment. They're sort of like, "Wow, what a wild run." They're just having a conversation while Art Carney lies in a bed and George Burns sits in a chair. They both fall asleep. Just mid conversation, George Burns wakes up and realizes that Art Carney has died,
Yes.
and attributes it to he had too much excitement.
Well, they didn't even stay in the hotel.
No,
They just leave.
Yeah.
And the logic, is it clear?
Well,
Why?
Burns, yeah, because they end up winning a great deal of money at the casino,
$70,000.
and Burns starts to freak out, thinking
they're making too much of a.
if they've
Scene.
won that much money, the authorities are gonna notice them, and he's worried about getting caught for the robbery. So he
Still,
doesn't want
right, 'cause
any
that's an
attention
unsolved
paid. And he's
case.
like, they have detectives who work here and look for thieves, and
'Cause, yeah, there's that
even though they won the
argument.
money in Vegas, honestly,
It's
he's
fruit of the
afraid of
poisonous
talking to
tree,
any. He's like, I
yes.
just want to get out of here with this money and get back to Queens right away.
Take it in
Yeah.
cash, not like
right,
a
don't
check.
get the check.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
put
they
it in
take
this
it in
bag.
cash, and they deal with the cashier, which again is a perfectly cast person who really seems like a nice cashier lady.
Yes.
Doesn't seem like an actor dealing with these old men
Yes.
who there's no shtick involved. It's
And
great.
between, I think, the robbery and the Vegas sequence, I forget where it lands exactly, but there's the scene we alluded to briefly of George Burns looking through sort of like the memory box.
Yeah, we talked about it. Yeah,
But then he pisses himself
Hmm.
while crying and stands up and goes to the bathroom.
and he's like, full circle. I'm a baby again.
yeah, like a scene that could be played so broad and silly, and even describing it right now, you're like, how could
Yeah.
that be pulled off in a way that is emotionally resonant? And he stands up and just goes to the bathroom and is just like, I'm just crying and pissing myself. It's
Yeah,
all
he
full
says, I guess
circle."
the goddamn cycle is complete
Yeah.
now.
he should have gotten an Oscar nomination.
And
He
it
should've.
is funny, but it's equally sad
Yeah.
and
Yes.
touching.
I would have given all three of these guys Oscar nominations.
Well, it's tough to give. Yeah. Let's see. It's a good year. Dustin Hoffman, Kramer versus Kramer, is best actor.
right, Roy
Jack-
Scheider, all that jazz.
Roy Scheider, all that jazz. Peter Sellers being there, which is obviously
Yeah.
Al Pacino in Injustice for All, which is not a movie I love very much, but it's Al Pacino.
But I'm gonna
like,
bump that one.
uncorking, you know.
That's a bump for me.
And Jack Lemmon for the China Syndrome, which he's awesome in. I guess that's sort of the softest nom there, and it's fucking Jack Lemmon,
Heavy hitters in that one.
And then supporting
supporting.
actor is Duvall in Apocalypse Now, which insanely does not win. Melvin Douglas wins for
Who
being
wins?
there, who's
Yeah.
good.
All right, that's also thank you, Melvin Douglas, for
Little
your
bit.
years of
Yeah,
service.
Right.
A lovely performance.
Mickey Rooney in The Black Stallion. That's a weird.
Thank you for your years
famously
of
weird
service.
Tip of the hat to the
That's a-
mixer, but maybe that's a bump for Lee Strasberg. in
Right.
my-
They're like, Mickey, thank you for not playing Asian in this one. That's all.
Yeah,
That's
right,
why
right.
at least you're playing an Irish guy.
yes.
Frederick Forrest in The Rose, which is a really cool nomination,
Oh, yeah.
actually. It's
Okay.
nice
Yeah.
that he. And then the kid in Kramer versus Kramer, Justin Henry,
sure.
which you probably want to
Hey,
play. He's
man,
good.
He's
I mean,
great in
it's
the
a pretty
great
excellent
in the ice
performance.
cream scene.
That's true.
But maybe you get one of the old guys in there. But I guess it's kind of like, well, we've already
That's
given
true.
these guys trophies.
They've had their
Strasberg just
laurels.
the one who hadn't won.
Strasberg could have.
But I agree with you. No one's phoning it in. They're all really committing to these performances. The performances have dimension and
Yes.
nuance. They understand the assignment. It's
And as you
Too
said,
many of the voters, though, were like,
David.
Strasberg gave me a D.
this movie.
that's right. Strasberg was not very well liked in the theater community.
I mean, I think,
Yeah.
I
By
think he
many
was a
people.
prickly fella.
he
Yeah.
was considered a bit of a major asshole.
Yeah, he
Yeah.
doesn't seem like
I once
the
met
easiest guy.
I once met Cloris Leachman,
Mm.
and she had been in the Cloris Leachman.
No,
the
I said
eminent-
ooh.
Oh, I thought you said
love
who, and I was
Cloris Leachman.
astonished that you said who. No, you said who. And I asked her about the actor studio, and she said, "Oh, Lee Strasberg was a real cocksucker."
That sounds like something she would say too.
And it was kind of great seeing. Now that was shticky old person talking dirty comedy, but it was real life.
But Cloris Leachman, I mean, I would have paid for just 200 minutes of her on a Broadway stage doing shticky old person, saying cocksucker. Like, that sounds great.
By the way, she was wearing an outfit that she looked like she'd bought it at Forever 21. It was like some sort of fashionable workout outfit. She looked super
finally
cool.
departed this moral.
She has.
code,
We lost
right?
her.
This was about 15.
She was 94 years old.
She only died a year or two ago.
Yeah, 2 years ago. Because I remember when she
Yeah.
did Malcolm in the Middle, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, oh yeah, of course, Cloris Leachman's kind of playing a grandma now.
Yeah.
And then she did Raising Hope, which was like 15 years later, and you're like, she's still just playing grandmas. Like she's got like 3 cycles of grandma in her.
She wanted to reprise her role in Young Frankenstein for the Broadway musical.
Oh, that would have been amazing.
And Mel Brooks said he wouldn't do it because he was worried about the insurance policy of her having to dance every night.
I mean, must have been in her 80s.
She
Yeah.
lived another 10 years.
Right. Well,
And
showed him.
she, to spite him, I believe, went on Dancing with the Stars the following cycle to be like, I'm not falling down, Mel.
She's a regular George Burns.
Yeah.
Okay. Just to finish the plot.
Suddenly it's like George Burns is all alone.
Right. He gives all of the money to Pete at this point.
And
Pete, by the
he
way,
confesses.
living
He
big.
confesses to
Yes.
Pete. Yes.
That it was actually a robbery, not an insurance
But
policy.
he's like,
and
"Don't
they're
tell
like,
anyone."
we want to give you this money.
The
And
heat's
they're like,
on.
so you can open your own gas station. That's the idea,
Right.
too.
And he's heard on the news broadcast that they think there might be leads.
There have been
on-
some radio broadcasts, and the last one says the FBI is on the case. So George knows that the heat is closing
Could
in.
you imagine this becoming like an exciting news story for the New York Post to be like 3 old guys robbed a bank?
Oh, it would be
It's almost like they're going in
it's such
style.
tabloid
Right.
fodder.
The
yeah.
media would,
They were
would have a field
Groucho
day with this.
glasses.
And everybody would be on the side of these old guys, too.
Yeah. And
Yes.
Burns is like,
I don't know what it is, but something must have been sloppy.
And we never do learn what it is.
No.
He just gets pinched.
he gets pinched.
There's a great scene where he's going to go to Al's funeral, and he puts on a suit.
Yeah.
He's by himself. And
Yeah.
again, the only reason they put on a suit is to go to a funeral or to do a bank robbery.
Yes.
And then there's a very interesting moment where he shuts off, he shuts off the lights. He's going to go to the funeral. And right before he leaves the apartment, he looks at the apartment. And then he exits. And it's
Almost
like
as if
he's
he
having a
knows.
premonition. Like,
Yeah.
I'm saying goodbye to this place.
Yeah.
Like he knows he's going to get pinched.
Yeah.
But it's not played in a super obvious way. It's very subtle.
No, and also,
And then he goes outside and is immediately arrested.
you have to imagine, if not pinched, he's like, I might have a heart attack before I make it back here.
Yeah.
My friends are dropping off.
But
like
he
flies.
looks at his home
Yes.
in a way that's like, this might be the last look I have of
There
this
are
home.
2 very likely scenarios in which he never returns to that apartment.
Yes.
Either he gets thrown in jail or he dies.
Exactly.
And either one could be happening at any moment.
Well,
And
he
he-
gets pinched.
Gives this final great, like, fucking speech.
Right.
An
'cause
FBI,
Pete's
a
like-
kind of smarmy FBI guy comes in and says, look, tell us where the money is and we'll go easy on you.
Right.
Yeah.
And he's like, go to hell.
He's essentially like,
I
I'd,
did it.
rav-
I
I'd
did
rather
it.
die in
Put me
prison.
away.
Yeah.
Right.
Put me away, but I'm not going to tell you where the money is.
You can't scare me. Like, what can you throw at me that is worse than my oncoming death that I cannot avoid?
Yes. And like, as we all know, of course, he's going to live another 20 years because that's what
Yes.
George Burns went ahead
That's
and
right.
did.
He's got,
So he's probably going to be running that prison.
he's got 4 more major movies left in him.
Well,
5?
He's going to start the theater company at the prison. And,
Right.
Yeah.
But Pete comes to the last scene is
He's-
Pete goes to the prison to visit him. And he says, they treat me like a king around here, which I'm sure
Yeah.
they're all like, this is the baddest motherfucker in the joint.
Fucking rules.
And he's like, the food's okay.
Yeah.
And I have my own toilet. That's one of the perks.
But that's part of his argument at the beginning when he's pitching it to the guys is like, worst case scenario, they put us in jail. That's our rent paid for. They have to feed us all day.
Yeah, all our social security checks accumulate.
just
We'll
stack
come
up.
out with like
Right.
thousands of
So
dollars.
it was all worth it.
It was all worth it.
I mean, the only sacrifice he had to make was his own like life, I guess. But right, what was his life anyway?
Yeah.
But it's still a sad ending, or
Yes.
incredibly melancholy ending.
Yeah.
Like, whereas I believe again the Zach Braff remake ends with everyone going to see Garden State in a big multiplex or
Right.
whatever happens in that movie.
Morgan Freeman plays
Certainly, everyone survives.
the shins for Michael Caine.
It'll change your life. Yeah.
But that movie just feels like it's kind of generically doing like Ocean's 81 or whatever, right? Like it's not this.
Yeah.
It's just what if old guys did a crime?
Well, yeah, absolutely. This, on paper, this sounds generic as hell.
Yeah.
But maybe that's just because we've had the last 40 years of that approach to this kind of story.
Same with Beverly Hills Cop, though. Same with Midnight Run, where you're like, we've been living in an era of seeing like the shittier versions of the things that Martin Brest perfected. I mean, Going in Style is basically a movie coming off of a trend of like Las Vegas and stand-up guys. There was like that whole run of like, you put 4 old legendary Oscar-winning leading men in a movie where they're playing like misbehaving dudes.
What's the Tim Allen one? Where the
Wild Hogs.
Wild Hogs.
Right. That's the middle-aged version of that, basically.
I think that's interesting about this too. You're talking about like out of the gate, how this seems like someone who's made many more films because of its the power of its restraint, which seems like something you only learn after you make a lot of movies. Is that it sort of has all the elements of all the films, but in a more restrained way. So it has the criminal comedy element of Beverly Hills Cop and Midnight Run.
Micho Black is explicitly about death, which he always said was his major obsession.
But also, Son of a Woman and Micho Black are kind of, he leans on sentiment in those. I'm not necessarily saying that's a bad thing, but the sentiment is leaned on a bit more. In fact, the sentiment and the sort of grandness of the stories drives those movies in the way that the plot mechanics drives Beverly Hills Cop and Midnight Run.
It's what I don't
this
understand
has sentiment
about what happened to him.
and plot.
It's not at all.
But it's much more low key.
Yeah.
And again, that's the power of it.
I just don't understand. And maybe I'm going to watch Meet Joe Black and be like, this is an underrated gem.
Yeah.
But I don't think so because it's not a very popular movie. And what I've seen of it, I did not respond to. I don't really understand how this guy kind of lost it a little bit and got lost in the weeds of like both movie stardom and these like all of these later movies are very long and like not economical as this film is. Like, like I really like the economy of this movie.
Yes, it's very blank checky.
Yeah.
Because he gets to do these overlong, somewhat grandiose films near the end.
Right.
And I agree. I don't think they're as good as the early funny ones.
And well, one of those. But also, like, he becomes a runaway shoot guy. He becomes, like, James L. Brooks is very similar to this, where it's like, now it becomes you got to give the master his time and space because he just knows it when he sees it, and he has to keep doing scenes over and over again and rewriting and re-editing.
No one's going, Kubrick's going over budget, so you've got to finish this thing up.
Right.
He's got, and there is, the irony is there is freedom in the grid. There is freedom in the limitations, and that's very powerful. You see that in this, definitely.
This film was a hit. I just want you guys to understand that. It came out at Christmas. It was word of mouth
George Burns,
success.
still Mr. Hollywood.
It was like an A cup. It wasn't a big-breasted hit on the level of Beverly Hills Cop. If we're creating a scale of
I need to get you
comparison.
a shepherd's crook that you can, yank him with.
Now, can I just do a sidebar here?
Please.
So my son, Severin Urbaniak, who was mentioned on the prior podcast that we did on Buster Keaton.
Yes.
Who is here in the studio with us today, who I used to babysit when I would fly out to LA for auditions and such, and stay on your couch.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, you were very young,
So
but
hi.
I'd stay on your couch for free, and in exchange, I would give you and your then wife date nights where I would watch the
When
kids.
Griff was in LA, sometimes when you were very young, he came over and watched. But then you guys met in LA a couple months ago when I was doing
after the play. Yeah.
But Severin was going to just hang out in the studio today, but I wanted him to see the film so he wouldn't be completely at sea as we talked about this for 2 hours. But he is a young man who's about to turn 18. And what were your thoughts on this film?
Well, thank you, James / my dad. I liked it a lot.
You liked it a lot. So here's a young person who's still responding to the
Yes, I am.
to this
I am
40-year-old
responding.
movie about old guys.
And if you like the movie, here's a pitch for you. There's a movie in which George Burns plays an 18-year-old. Or
wow.
17?
I've never
No.
seen that film.
What
That
film
film's
is that?
18 again?
18 again, where
Which is different than 17
George Burns, it's in the bodies. I don't know if it's a body swap, but George Burns suddenly
Yes.
becomes young in the early 80s. And a young actor who I believe is named Charlie
Schlatter.
I believe that
Schlatter,
is
who
correct.
years later we had the same voiceover agent, and I met Charlie Schlatter in LA. But I've never seen that film. But so a young man gets to chomp cigars and go, wow, that was radical, dude.
Right. Most of the movie, I guess, he's not
I
on
know,
screen.
Harry Truman.
He's not on
Yes.
screen, and it's Charlie Schlatter doing a George Burns.
It's kind
And
of
I'm guessing his friends are like, hey, do you want to go to the movies? And he's like, sure, is the new Ingrid Bergman picture play? And stuff like that.
I don't know if I can go to the Nickelodeon. My wrist is
I was
hurting.
literally about to make a
I can
Nickelodeon joke.
like say another thing.
Please.
I guess like I do agree that it was like very reserved for sure.
Mhm.
Like when the guys die, it's
Mhm.
kind of sudden. Like when it happens, it's like it's a couple scenes, but it doesn't really feel like I mean, it's surprising, but it's not really shocking.
Yeah, and I
It
think
does
that's
feel like
part of the theme of the
natural.
thing. That's that because death is such a normal part of these guys' lives.
Yeah.
It's still sad and painful, but that is kind of the point. It's not shocking. In fact, it's so not shocking. It's, like we said, it's mundane.
Martin Brest did an interview last year, and they were asking him about what made him write this movie when he
Still
was in
alive?
his 20s.
Yep.
And he said, even in my 20s, when I did Going in Style, it seemed to me the biggest possible issue, mortality. What could be a bigger idea than that?
I think that's a good point, Seb, because also the deaths are not major plot turns at all.
It's just what happens.
It's just what happens.
It's true.
Yeah. And by the way, we touched on it briefly, but another sequence that also feels like he's just shooting and letting stuff happen is this great sequence where they're going to do the thing. It's before the robbery, but they're all in a good mood because they're going to do this thing. So
Yeah.
they have something to do. And they're walking, they've gone to scope out the bank.
Yeah.
They scope out the bank the day before they do it.
The dance
They
sequence.
literally just go to a bank in Manhattan.
Yeah.
And Burns is like, this will work. All right, we're done. We'll do it. Can you get the guns tonight? Great, we'll do it
He
tomorrow.
has some line like, why do
It's
we have?
true.
It's a bank's a bank.
And then they're walking in like Midtown, and there's some guys, there's like a steel drum combo.
Yeah.
And Lee Strasberg starts bopping his head, and then Carney kind of looks at him. And then almost like there's a thing where also Carney now and then goofs on Lee Strasberg a little bit.
Yeah.
And he starts goofing on him, but then Carney does this sort of eccentric Art Carney dance, and the crowd is into it. And it's incredibly charming. And it's just and it goes on for a little while. And it's just about this guy with joy in his life
Yeah.
again
Right.
for a minute. And Carney's really funny, but again, he's not being shticky with it. It just seems like the way this guy would happily dance, and you go along with it. It's a very joyous, real moment, and people are enjoying it. But again, it doesn't feel staged. It feels like it's actually happening. It has a documentary quality
It's
to it,
beautiful.
and that's the strength of so many of the sequences in the film.
There's another moment like that where when Burns is going to each teller during the bank robbery, he keeps like complimenting them.
Yeah, and he's kind of making little jokes, but
Yeah.
it's like the anecdote that Burns told. They're not George Burns style wisecracks.
Right,
They're
sure.
just things that George Burns. In fact, there's a moment in the casino where Burns says something like, "Why don't you give me more money? I'm being funny." Like he actually says that. But yeah, at one point he says to like the teller, like the jokiest joke is a teller fills the bag. He goes, "You're doing a good job. Ask your boss to give you a raise."
Yeah.
But again, it feels like Joe
It's a good
just
bit.
in a good mood. It doesn't feel like a famous comedian doing shtick in a movie.
No.
Yeah.
I was struggling to find anything that backed this up, but I was curious if, like, did these guys even get, like, Golden Globe acting nominations or whatever? This film played at the Venice Film Festival in 1980, the year after it was released.
Yes, they won a joint award. Is that
Yes,
right?
the Pazinetti Award, which it seems like there was a 10-year run where the Venice Festival didn't give out acting awards, but there was a sort of Pazinetti Award that was for some other extra, like, accomplishment related to a film.
Who's Pazinetti?
I would
An Italian film figure?
PM Pazinetti.
Pasolini's cousin?
Yes. He was like one of the first Italian film critics. I think he's like an
Oh, okay.
early, person.
Yeah.
His award still exists. I don't know the
But
arcane
the
details.
three of them
Yeah.
split a Best Actor award, but
Yes.
not when there was a designated Best Actor trophy. It was sort of like the Pazinetti this year goes to these three guys for acting, which I thought was cool. Anyway, this movie was a hit.
This movie was a hit. It was a soft, slow word of mouth success, but
it's very word of mouthy.
it made $30 million, having cost $5 million. So it was obviously like a very worthwhile little thing. It is kind of funny to think it got good reviews. Siskel liked it. Can be lukewarm in the
Canby's often lukewarm
in the New York Times. He was a bit of a grump.
I will say, Siskel, who you and I agree was never the finest writer, his going in style review is
He nails it.
really good.
Yeah,
It's kind of one of the more beautiful pieces of wording I've ever seen out of him.
Yeah, I think Siskel gets the not as good a writer rap because Ebert was a better writer than him. But like I've read Siskel reviews where I'm like, this guy had the juice. Let's play the box office game. Also, of course, it was famously remade by Zach Braff, inexplicably starring a bunch of guys.
Yep.
The film came out at Christmas 1979, Griffin.
Okay.
It's opening at number 10. So it's not in the top 5.
No.
Christmas 79. Very
Christmas
exciting.
79.
I am a
Can you place yourself?
77. I am a sophomore in high school.
Okay, so you probably would have been interested,
But
I'm
I
going to
wasn't-
say, in some of these movies.
Yeah, I don't know that I was. This is funny because I was on another podcast recently where I was trying to remember, like, when Star Wars came out, what movies I saw in 77. And there were very few. So I wasn't going to the movies a lot in high school. But this is interesting. We'll see how I do.
So the number one film at the box office is, I am not sure how you feel about this franchise, but I feel like you might like it a little bit, is a science fiction film.
Okay.
Is it Star Trek: The Motion Picture?
Correct.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I saw it when it came out with my friend Dan, who I often went. If I went to the movies, I went with
Shout
my
out,
friend
Dan.
Dan. And Dan was kind of a sci-fi nerd. He later wrote for Starlog magazine.
Oh, that's cool. We've quoted from Starlog many
I
times.
saw
on this podcast.
Capricorn 1 with Dan.
Not a bad movie. But you're not a huge Star Trek guy, but you saw it. It was a big movie.
I didn't
of the
really
year.
watch. I didn't really watch Star Trek. Like, I just didn't. I wasn't that into it. But it was just. I went to the movie because it was a big deal. I remember what a big deal it was.
At the time. It was the big. Obviously, it's somewhat disappointed, but people, I think, confused that with. It was still a massive hit.
Yeah.
It just cost a lot of money to make. So that's number one. It's been number one for a month.
Wow.
Number two is the film that will win Best Picture of 1979. Another gigantic hit, but
Which
it's
is
just beginning its run.
The Deer Hunter.
No, that's I think the year before.
It's not Kramer versus Kramer.
It is Kramer versus Kramer.
Which was the
Hello.
highest grossing film of its year, right?
I mean, like, it's one of those things though where it's like it's just beginning its run now.
Yes.
But
Okay.
yes, it's obviously a huge grosser. Now, number three is a comedy Griffin. One of your guys, one of his
one of my
early
guys.
hits.
It's not The Jerk.
It is The Jerk.
It is The Jerk.
All right, I saw
Now,
that in
I
the
thought
theater.
you might have seen that too.
Probably with Dan again, my
Hey,
movie
Dan.
buddy.
Yeah. That must have been incredible to see first run.
I can remember moments. I can remember the laughter in the theater at moments.
Yeah.
But even small, like Pizza in a Cup, I remember getting a big laugh in the theater.
Everything in that
It's
movie
pretty
is funny.
Pretty fun.
I watched that again a few weeks ago, and it really holds up.
I think it is still
Directed
pound
by
for
Carl
pound.
Reiner, who really knows how to direct comedy.
I
One of
think
the funniest movies ever made.
You
in my
must like The
opinion.
Jerk.
I'm obsessed with it.
Yes, I think a lot of Steve Martin stuff holds up better than almost any other comedy of that era.
His whole body of work, I think, makes more sense
Yes.
than a lot of guys who you point at and go like, you kind of had to be there.
Right.
There was a thing going on in the culture, and it's all the more fascinating because he's gone through so many cultural shifts of what
He's
his
changed what he does.
persona is. I'm very excited to watch that documentary.
I
That
hear it's good.
will have been out by many months
Oh, yeah, right.
by the time this
Yeah,
comes
it
out.
just came out.
The sequence when he is leaving at the
funniest
end
shit in the world.
and
The
he keeps
objects?
grabbing things.
Classic sequence.
I
of the
don't
most-
need anything.
One of the
I don't
most
need
famous
you. Just-
comedy sequences
it's-
ever, I would argue.
I
Just this
think about
paddleball and
it
this
kind of all
thermos
the time.
and
I
this
think it's
chair.
just one of the best pieces of comedy acting.
Yeah, I
This-
think that
yeah.
movie has 15 of those.
Yeah.
I think that's probably the best one, but you're like, there are 15 things in that movie I could point to where I'd be like, that's like an instructional for the funniest a thing could be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the late Emmett Walsh doing a brilliant turn.
Recently late.
Hates these cans.
And then the equally funny payoff when he shows up and sort of sheepishly apologizes for trying to kill
Yes.
it. Yeah,
Yes.
I just got divorced, and also I quit smoking. Is the reason.
And that being the
He gives
build
this little
up
smile.
of the phone book, like that movie is so well
I
constructed.
remember, it's a classic line, but I can remember being in the theater and he hates these cans getting a huge laugh.
Yeah,
Um,
I wish I could have been.
He Hits These Cans is just very funny.
Yeah.
Number 4 at the box office. It is a family sci-fi film.
family sci-fi film in 1979.
So this is a sci-fi film that's rated G? Is that what you're saying?
I believe it has a PG. Actually, it was notoriously the first film from the studio to get a PG rating.
Oh, it's a Disney film?
Okay.
Is it The Black Hole?
The Black Hole.
Didn't I guess that already?
Did
Or
you?
Has that just been in my mind?
Perhaps.
It's probably just in your mind. It feels like, again, like a
You
bit of
know,
a James movie.
But earlier you said science fiction,
Possibly it came up then.
and then I thought, I was thinking of, so it was in my head. But you guys said it first, so you
Okay.
win.
Nobody's winning anything except
like the
for
game we played
knowledge.
last
You'll
time.
get a
Yeah,
participation
exactly.
trophy. It is funny that, like, this is 79, Hollywood clearly responding to 77, Star Wars and
Yeah,
Close
Star
Encounters
Wars
blowing up
ripoff.
so big.
Right.
And then they return with, like, Star Trek and Black Hole, both of which are so slow, that are borderline art films of just, like, watching
The Black
vehicles
Hole-
move through space as slowly as possible.
Disney presents Andrei Tarkovsky's
Yes.
The Black
Like,
Hole.
Black Hole is closer to Solaris than you would imagine.
I would say exactly that. Like the
Yeah.
Black Hole makes Star Trek the motion picture look like, Death Race 2000.
I
or
did
like, you
not
know what I mean? Like the Black Hole
see
is
The Black Hole.
I
when it
like
came out.
The Black Hole, but it's one of the most ponderous studio films
it's
ever
very
made.
ponderous. It's like Maximilian Schell and Anthony Perkins. Like it's all these
And
kind of
Borgnine
like and
jerking off in the
Borgnine
corner of the ship.
and the robots, of course.
That's how we had to stay young.
But
yeah.
it's a movie that every time I've watched it, which is like 2.5 times,
Yeah.
I've been like, I'm really gonna like it this time, and I'm always like,
I
not
watch it
really.
when I have insomnia, and it really does the trick.
Oh, it's really good for that. Number 5 at the box office is a film with movie stars that was a hit, but I think is pretty, and a big director, but is pretty forgotten. It got kind of mixed reviews.
Was
didn't
it
get,
a
like, awards
disaster
attention.
film?
No, it's like a sort of comedy drama. It's
Can I ask, like, the age of these movie stars? How established are they at this point?
very established at this point, I would say.
Middle-aged type people?
Yeah, well, like, let's say like, late 30s, early
Is it
40s.
a Neil Simon?
No.
Good guess, though.
Right. I'm thinking
all
like
I guess.
that vibe. It's not like a Four
What
Seasons
did you
type
say the
thing.
genre?
It's like a comedy drama, but it does have a Western tinge to it.
It has a Western tinge.
a Western
1979.
Yes.
1979, Western tinge,
Was how
old school movie stars.
The film was successful. It made $60 million on a $10 million budget.
Huh.
The film's kind of well known for a musician making his acting debut in it.
Is it Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid?
No. Solid guess, though. I think that was a little earlier.
Yeah.
That's, of course, Bob Dylan.
Is Mr. Willie Nelson?
That
the
is
actor?
correct. Willie Nelson is making his acting debut.
Willie Nelson plays a man in prison.
That's Thief,
Okay, I
Is
was
this-
thinking of Thief.
but that is not this film.
No.
It's not called Ramblin' Bros, is it?
No, that's a really good movie.
Yeah.
That's much later.
Willie Nelson's acting debut, Western.
Is Willie Nelson a supporting role or
He
one
is.
of the principal characters?
He is. It looks like he's the fourth lead here.
And it's kind of forgotten, you said?
This movie, I think, is forgotten now. Yes, but again, like it was a reasonably sized hit. But given
How-
the two major stars and the major director, I think it was seen as underwhelming.
Huh.
You might not know this movie. I don't know. You probably know the title.
My
What is
mind's
it?
a blank.
It's directed by Sidney Pollack.
Okay.
If that helps, it stars Robert Redford and Jane Fonda.
The Electric Horseman.
The film is
There
called
we
The
go.
Electric Horseman.
I do know that title.
Which is what it's like. He's an old rodeo guy, and
Mm-hmm.
Never seen it. I just, once you said that,
Great to
it was either that or Rhinestone Cowboy. One of those.
As a very young person, it hasn't endured into my time.
That's
no,
right.
it is not.
Yes.
Remembered.
It's not big on TikTok?
yet.
I don't
Yeah.
have TikTok.
Look, you don't even know who Tom Green is. That's how young you
We
are.
were talking about Tom Green before Mike, who now feels like George Burns.
He kind of, or like something else though, like who some old vaudevillian
Right.
where by the 50s he'd been.
But Sev, you
forgotten.
got to admit that the Electric Horseman is a pretty cool
It's
title.
a good title.
It does sound pretty cool.
Yeah.
The other movies in the top 10, 1941, the Spielberg mega flop.
Ah, yes.
Although it actually made money.
It's a bounce.
His first World War II film.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Apocalypse Now,
Mm-hmm.
big hit of 1979. A movie called Roller Boogie starring Linda Blair,
Cool.
which I don't really know. The Rose, which is the Bette Midler movie, she gets an Oscar nom for,
Sure.
and Going in Style.
Incredible.
That's
By
what
the
you
way,
had.
the score, kind of a pastiche of a 1930s jazz score,
But real good.
going in style that works. Got
Yeah.
a little
Michael-
banjo.
Absolutely.
got a
Michael
little-
Small.
Michael Smile has
Yeah.
a little banjo in it.
Yeah.
Very waka waka,
I need to go take my little cousin to see Godzilla X Kong.
Okay.
What's
I-
it called again? The New Empire?
Either or the New Empire.
But James, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. I
Thank
need to
you for
take my
kicking this
son
off.
back to New Jersey to see my family.
Who are
we're
the
visiting.
Godzilla ex-Kong of New Jersey?
Yes.
Your family?
An old empire.
My dad is the Godzilla of the family,
Yeah.
a towering figure.
There we
that
go.
We're all in awe of.
So we all have the same plans tonight.
Who's the Kong?
Yeah. Who's the Kong? That's that's what you need to resolve tonight.
Maybe it's James.
James, is there anything you want to plug?
I'm in there's an Apple Plus series called Palm Royale, starring
Oh, yeah.
Kristen
Oh,
Wiig.
yes.
Which I hear is so funny.
I
and
have heard
good.
only incredible things.
Kristen Wiig plays a lady trying to socially climb 1960s Palm Beach.
Carol Burnett.
Carol Burnett is in it, who I don't have any scenes with, but who I met at a table read, and I must say,
She's sort of a George Burns, where she's still going. Yeah.
I was honored to meet her, and I
Yes.
told her I said, which is true,
Yeah.
if my late mother had only known that I would be working with Carol Burnett someday, she would get quite a kick out of that.
That's pretty well.
I'm sure Carol Burnett, God bless her, gets a lot of people coming up to her being like, "It is a true honor to meet you."
But she, I 100%.
I'm sure she handles it
but
with
she
aplomb.
handled it very nicely to me.
right.
And then there's a handful of independent films. I'm in it. There's an indie called Breakup Season that just won a bunch of awards at a festival in Utah.
Hey.
So where I play a dad. But
Wow.
it's a bit of a stretch. But so that's going to be on the festival circuit. Look for that. Directed by a very talented guy named Nelson Tracy.
I look forward
Very smart young man. I had a joke, and he said, "That's a good James Urbaniak joke, but not a good Mr. Breakup
You
joke."
got neckties older than him.
Yeah, I got neckties older. I have mouse pads older than this.
And of course, Oppenheimer. If you haven't seen that,
Yeah, it could.
He's
Let's
in
give
that one.
Oppenheimer the blank check.
yeah, that
bump.
movie's not really getting.
I
not
can
really.
be briefly glimpsed
In
of
which you play
Oppenheimer.
Kurt Gödel, who I believe had George Burnsy glasses. He had circle glasses.
I
that
do. I
guy.
have little circle glasses in that. I don't have a cigar, but
Well, but half there.
I'm an Easter egg. Kurt Gödel is sort of a for math geeks.
Yes.
He was a famous physicist, and so I didn't think I'd make the cut, but somehow Mr. Nolan kept
Well,
me
yeah,
in.
you stuck to Einstein like white on
I
rice
stuck
or
to
whatever.
You made-
I just stayed in the. I always tried to stay in the shot with Einstein, so you
Of
can see me
course.
waving like I'm photobombing in a.
You made the
background.
cut, and I feel like I heard so many blankies talk about at their screenings doing the fucking DiCaprio
Yeah.
point at the screen.
I got a lot of
excitement.
texts from friends who had no idea it was in it.
Yeah.
Yesterday, a friend of mine actually seemed to get angry with me because his suspension of disbelief shattered to the floor when fucking James Urbaniak showed up. It's like, well, that's not. I know who that is.
But also, Matt Damon's in the movie. That didn't suspend your disbelief.
Yeah, it's a mad bomb.
Yes,
Like
that's-
someone turns around. Hey, look who it is! It's Phil Silvers.
That should have been the title. Thank you for being here, James.
Always a pleasure.
And thank you all for listening. Please remember to rate, review, and subscribe. Thank
Yes.
you to Marie Barty for co-producing the show. Thank you to Joe Bowen and Pat Reynolds for their
Our
artwork.
artwork.
Thank you to AJ McKeon and Alex Barron for our editing, Lee Montgomery and the Great American Novel for our theme song, JJ Birch for our research. I should mention AJ McKeon, also production coordinator on the show. You can go to blankcheckpod.com for links to some real nerdy shit, including our Patreon, Blank Check special features.
Next episode is Hot Dogs for Gauguin and Hot Tomorrows in 2 days.
There
if
we
you
go.
wish to
We're
listen to
doing a
that.
temporal pincer movement, moving
Yeah,
back
yeah.
to his two guarantors, basically. And also doing tabletop games, correct? Or are we still on Turtles? Toys?
It looks like we are still on Turtles.
Then we're still turtling. Turtle. Tune in next week for Beverly Hills Cop,
Good movie.
a wildly successful film.
That's true. I'm getting calls from the same spam people who call me every day. It just happens every day.
Great.
Yep.
And as always, George Burns lived another 17 years after this movie was made.